Tune into this as well as many other awesome episodes only available on Patreon.
Hey, why don't you rub your cock up against the phone? Let me see what kind of noise it makes.
I'm not going to do that.
Just do it. It's a big deal.
Are you gay?
Which Howard are you talking to?
The one who asked that question.
Oh, no. I'm just trying to be entertaining, that's all. I'm not gay. Am I gay? Of course not. I have a wife.
A lot of gay men have one.
Yeah, but come on. You know me. You know I'm not gay. I'm just asking the guy how big his cock is.
Well, you ask him to rub it up against the phone.
And all you do is mooch off of people. You do nothing. You're a big homo.
That's not entirely true.
What do you do, really?
I'm bisexual and I don't mooch off everybody.
People are going to be shocked that you put out an exercise and diet book because they don't think of you that way, right? They think about you. But here you are today with is the book out now?
Yep, Formula 50.
Is there a bunch of pictures of you with your shirt off so we can see your muscularity?
Well,
No, I didn't take my shirt off.
Musculature?
We got to have an example.
I want to see your musculature.
This is not about... this is not the Chippendale show, Robin.
Are you very ripped? If you took off your clothes now, you were totally nude. Would I see a man who is in the prime condition?
You have to have him totally nude?
Yeah.
Look,
Would you mind being totally nude right now?
Yeah, I'm not taking my clothes off.
Please.
I was trying to give me a strip in here.
Please, if you
That's one of them girls you bring up here.
Take off your clothes. Take off your shirt. Let me see
I'm
what's
not taking
doing.
my shirt off.
I want to see if you got titties on it.
Last time I watched the show, I see you had the porn stars up there.
Yeah.
And y'all had the girls in here stripping and stuff like that. I'm like, me? You want to bring me here and make me a
I want you nude right now.
You got to be kidding me, man.
Come on, man.
I'm doing way too good for this kind of shit, Howard.
Look at your ass. You're so muscular.
Do you have muscles in your ass that you'd like to show?
I'm not doing this in a gay way. I just want to, I just want to see if you're fat or not. I just want to see. It's not gay.
No, I'm just saying,
man. Tip of your balls to the tip of your penis was over 9 inches.
No, right at the
9 inches.
Yeah. Is that, you making me feel good, man. I thought that, because when you watch porno, those dudes is like a foot.
9 is perfect.
Oh, all right. Well, maybe that's that's the secret. Oh, that's it. Wait, hold on, Robin. Is 9 perfect, Robin?
Perfect.
What does Howard mean by that?
You know exactly what I mean. My daughter's 15. All her friends are like consumed with who's gay and who isn't. Yeah, that's like a big thing.
That's the new thing.
Yeah, right. They think I'm gay. Everyone's gay.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to QF, a podcast about Howard Stern. I'm Jim Fix, your host, a.k.a. Fillmore Fingers, and with me once again is Sam, our Sam, and Ben. How you guys doing today? Ben?
Great. Glad to be back. Good to see you guys again.
It's great to have you back. Sam, how are you feeling? We only recorded 2 days ago, and that was a slog.
We've been on a recording
frenzy.
Mania. I feel like every other day we're doing this now, pretty much. I'm doing great, and I love when Ben's on. It's one of my favorite recording sessions, so I'm so happy.
We're just wondering, I'm wondering actually offhand, Ben, did you, what we just covered was the Vice TV Dark Side of Comedy episode with Artie in it. Did you bother watching any of that?
I didn't catch that. No, I didn't even know about it.
Yeah, I'll send you the link so you can watch it streaming. I mean, I don't know if you have a Vice TV thing, but it's hit and miss, the series. But the Artie episode's actually quite good because they got Mad TV cast members of the time to and also some that had nothing to do with Artie, discuss him. They got Tim Savian and Doug Goodstein, and there was one little bit of a revelation halfway through where I've never heard it. It was never on the air. It was never whether when he was on Stern or later, and but it was so dark to go through. Because it's hence the title of the series, The Dark Side of Comedy. But they did a really good job on Artie's episode, I think.
Yeah, you got to check it out. The Mad TV people, the difference between the way they handled things versus the Stern show is so palpable. You just feel, wow, this is a different cast of people who actually care.
Oh, yeah.
Did they go through that too with Bobby Lee at Mad TV? I think he had some addiction problems, and so they probably were.
He mentions that actually, because they consulted Bobby Lee, and I mean, who didn't really know Artie until way later. Bobby's a generation or two younger, and but he had his own problems. You're right. That's probably why they went and approached him about it.
I wish that ended his career.
Yeah, I'm not a Bobby Lee fan. I can't understand it. We said that in the episode too. At any rate, guys, if you guys are following along with the bouncing ball, whatever, bouncing virtual ball, we are in the hardcover. We're on page 50. If you recall, in the last episode, we were discussing at length and playing audio of well-met-looking Howard Hare talking about Fred and how he thought he was a little homo, and then there was actually the opposite, and he was grooming him in a hotel room. So we didn't get a chance to get into the audio about Fred, and that's what we're going to do now. So here's the first clip.
I mean, Fred's just a great talent. You know, Fred, I found him. He was in college. He was the overnight guy. And he was a college student who I still to this day don't know how he functioned, because he went to college all day and then he did overnights, which is the shittiest shift in radio. You're talking about midnight to 6, I think he did back then. So I came on at 6 a.m.
Most college kids have jobs. I mean, kids whose, parents don't pay for their education and they have to support themselves. Hello, pretty much. I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of our listeners, or me or you, or, you have jobs.
Yeah, I would say you function just like other people who do the graveyard shift, where you wake up early, go to work, then go to school, then go to bed.
I keep laughing because when I look back at some of the notes, Howard was given a gas card. So not only Ben give him, not only did Ben buy him his car, and pay for his tuition, he didn't even have to pay for gas.
And funny, keep that in mind when Howard's big thing is to hell with Shell, because he's protesting the gas lines. Yep. He's not even worried about gas prices. He's got his old man's credit card.
He said like a company card, but the company's your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's probably charging snacks.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Man, I did cocktail waitressing, for Christ's sake. I mean, I was up too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody. Well, I do know people, but they were extremely international students, for example. They weren't working when I was in university, but my God, everybody else had a job if they could get one. That just, to me, realistically, while they were undergrads.
And he was there, and he'd hang out, and once in a while he'd help me. He'd do a voice, and that was like heaven to me. That was kind of getting like King Schmaltz. I had a voice guy.
So it begins. Howard starts exploiting free workers.
Yeah, and we've covered King Schmaltz. What voice guy? They were pretty crappy.
Yeah, and you know what? It was another Billy West episode, and that was when you a video involving Billy West and Fred, and they were passing the ball around with Jackie, and it's never more apparent than when you watch one of those videos to see who's the weak link in this. Beyond Howard, after Howard, it's Fred. Jackie wasn't doing voices, but he was, compared to Billy West, it's such a poor comparison. It's like driving your little Chevy next to a BMW, and you just see every single aspect of what's wrong about this comparison.
I know. He wasn't.
Surprised.
And then, of course, he's obviously not being compensated that much in the beginning. And he acts like this King Schmaltz thing, by the way. I hate how we played it. I was shocked at how bad it was. Remember, my mouth was open like the whole episode.
Of course. Right.
And Howard's barely in it.
Yeah.
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 It was a guy to replace Bruce in a sense. And Fred was really good at it. He was talented, quick on his feet.
I was doing the overnights. I was also going to school at the time. He was the new morning man that came in, and he was just crazy and wild. And during like the crossovers, we would just like talk about things that, we'd seen on television or movies or whatnot. And I started doing some crazy voices like Richard Nixon or whatever. And he says, no, stick around. I'm going to go on the air in about 5 minutes. You can be Richard Nixon, and I'm going to talk to you as Richard Nixon. Or I'm going to talk to you as, Henry Kissinger, or as Muhammad Ali, or Howard Cosell. So that's where our association started, during those 5-minute, 20-minute crossovers from
When did you hear Fred do all these variety of voices well? I mean, just think about all those voices he just listed. There is no way that was good. Unbelievable.
They were always pretty hacky, but the only impressions I can recall where I actually enjoyed it so were when he would imitate Jim Florentine, which he had pretty down. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we have to be realistic about it, but other than that, when he would do Nicole Bass, I never laughed, never.
Never.
When he would do the Ronnie voice, certainly more recently, it was the worst impression. I mean, Sam, Mia could do a better Ronnie impression.
It was okay. Fred it's just overplayed.
Yeah.
Fred imposes things on his impressions that aren't there. Like when he does Bobo, and he'll go, wary. That's not how Bobo talks.
Yeah.
Bobo says R instead of V. So he'll say rary, not wary. That's Elmer Fudd. And then he'll go do the same thing with Ronnie and have him yelling out the C word constantly, which Ronnie does not do.
No.
Fred embraces that because he's an angry person who uses volume as comedy, basically. So if I'm loud, that means I'm being funny. But no, I've never. I have laughed at his sound effects over the years, not in recent years ever. But there was a time, but that was only as part of the tapestry of sound. So you got everybody firing at once, and Fred's just helping it along, but not Fred on his own.
No.
Right. I think I can equate it to the Alec Baldwin Trump impression, where it's not Trump. Like, it sounds kind of like Trump, but he's missing the ball of the other Trump impressionist now on SNL is way better. The guy who, goes into the satirical, ironic, the cadence, and that's more, I think, believable and how Trump actually is versus, these subconscious thoughts that just keep trailing on and on and on and on. That's funny.
Well,
Baldwin
you take it into
seem like an angry person doing it. It's not funny.
Yeah, and then in the Stern world, if you look at, say, Sour Shoes, he's got the material as well as he sounds just like the person most of the time. But the material is what you just go, wow. I mean, the material, whatever he's missing on the impression, he more than makes up for in the material itself, which is the really hard part to do.
Yeah.
And so anyway, you compare a talent like that, which Howard only recognized because he was forced to, basically, because everyone kept telling him until finally Jimmy Kimmel told him, Sour Shoes is a genius. Yes. You're on America's Got Talent, and you can't judge that this guy is great. And then Colin Quinn had to point it out to him, but he didn't recognize it right in front of his own face.
I know.
Well, Howard doesn't have the ear or the eye for comedy. He just doesn't, and it used to infuriate me for years when people would call him a stand-up, or they would refer to him as a comedian anyway. And he, you're not even getting the term right. He's nothing close to comedy. He's nothing close to a comedian in any stretch of the word. Because the other thing is, the key word is a stand-up comic. When does Howard ever stand alone? Even when he goes to do these appearances, he depends on, a boatload of people back home and a prearranged story that he claims is off the cuff, but has been planned down to the last dot, the last I, and the last T. So, Mr. Improv couldn't improv, as Johnny Carson famously said about Chevy Chase, couldn't ad-lib a fart at a baked bean dinner. I love that quote.
Right. So good.
Yeah.
So I would rather right now, the Stern Show is so bad. If they just played Sour Shoes voicemails all day, I'd be happier.
Oh, be fantastic. And guys, a lot of you won't know, but now I'll tell you, Ben, if you don't mind me saying, Ben has canceled his Sirius subscription, and he's no longer a regular listener.
Ooh.
Yeah, it happened on Wednesday. When he came back from vacation, because I'm no longer tweeting, tweeting, no longer doing any commenting, I would start listening to the show maybe 20 minutes after it starts, so I could build up some time and actually just skip altogether things I don't want to hear rather than listen to it live. And I was finding that when I got to the point when I could no longer skip, I just said, I'm not doing this, and would leave. And, I was only listening at this point to maybe the first third of the show, and that's it. Yeah. And in that time, and that's normally what I would listen to, where I could usually find the stuff I'm looking for, because that's where he's not doing bits usually. I mean, he does occasionally, but anyway, that's where I was most likely to find the stuff that was important to me. And in hearing only 1/3 of each show, I heard the story of his mother's television 6 times probably.
Oh yeah.
And it's just the idea, I've been saying for a while now that he uses the airwaves to reimburse himself for out-of-pocket expenses. So if you hear a story from his personal life, he's telling you for the reason that he wants to be given credit for something. So if he's telling you about renting a boxing match, it's because he wants to be reimbursed. So he's selling Sirius, here's some content, me talking about this. And now I paid for a TV for my mom and I paid my guys to install it. Sirius is going to pay me to talk about that. And I was listening the other day, and I don't know if this was really the incident, but he was talking about this bunny that they now have at their house and the great expense of taking care of a bunny and how you have to get it fixed, and that costs a lot of money. And he adds, and it cost me a lot of money. And I went, you mean I've been hearing this bunny story for the last 10 minutes because you want to be reimbursed for the bunny toys and bunny surgery? And I think I was listening to JD talk about baseball cards, and I go, I don't care about any of this anymore. And I just felt like I'll continue to talk to you guys about it, but I feel like I've just drained this guy of everything that could be useful to me at this point.
You're right, though.
And then, you know what? It might have taken this too. Hearing him discuss the death of a parent finally, when I go, all right, that's the best I can hope for. He scoffs at the death of his father because he replaced his parents with his therapist long ago. So these people are just financial burdens to him at this point.
Well, sorry, Sam, don't mean to cut you off. Bob and I covered Chicago Bob, one of our contributors. We did a breakdown because Raven is quite busy for the next little while, so she's been clipping. But I clipped that particular episode, and at one point he just says, "Yeah, I don't know." And I said, this is where this is where you feel the depths of grief and pain, ladies and gentlemen. And it meant nothing. And we did 3 hours and we managed to get some laughs out of it. But Bob was affected by it. It was so dark and depressing. And Raven couldn't. She said, it's maybe best for someone else to handle this with you because I will get too sad because she'll be thinking of her own dad. And again, another time. Talking about his dad as being a dementia patient in the hospital and insulting him, I got upset. I started crying when I was cutting the clips, and I started crying when we recorded. That's how affecting it was because I couldn't imagine saying that to my father. Or about him.
I think too, like I felt that way about the Artie situation with drugs, and just because I've dealt with it in my own life and lost somebody to an overdose, and it's like it was frustrating and angry. And you're right, Ben's right. Everything that he does now, that's why he doesn't leave his house, because he feels like that's an inconvenience and that's my time. And I want to do whatever I want to do in my time. And if I have to do anything else for anybody else, you bet your ass I'm going to complain about it on the radio. So I'm getting paid essentially for the shit that I'm not doing on my.
You want to hear how far I think it goes? He doesn't like that he has to pay for art supplies. So he goes on the air and talks about painting so that Sirius pays for those art supplies. Inadvertently, everything, he's just selling everything there's so much more interesting stuff, I'm sure, that goes on in his life. But he wants to be reimbursed. To think that while talking about his dad's death, he gave a shout out to the marketing guy at Nathan's Hot Dogs.
Not just Nathan,
because he's thanking him for $50 for the hot dog.
No, it was Dan's Papers too.
Yes,
I know that too.
Yeah, that too. He called it like the old barn, reminded him of his father. What?
Right. Yeah, but he also plugged
artist bullshit.
He plugged the funeral home 3 times.
Yes.
Yeah. I said, this is This is Steven Singer. This is no different.
Yes. That was unbelievable to me. I can't even tell you the funeral homes I've been to for family members. Like, I would not. Well, what are you doing? Like, how does that even cross your head?
It is weird. I assume it's because he's trying to get some kind of, how about if I pay you in plugs?
That was exactly what was going through my mind. I said, Bob, anytime you hear a name, because he said, "Oh, you know what? I gotta thank the hospice staff." And I stopped. And I said, "But I'm not going to." And he never does. He doesn't name them. The guy who played clarinet for his old man, a volunteer. I wish I would have got this name. And Bob was like, "This clarinet player's name would have been seared into my brain."
You know what, too, is his daughter visited a lot. I think the one, especially Ashley.
Ashley was a nurse, yeah.
So, but she was, I'm sure it's because she loves her grandparents. But a part of me thought, this cheap fuck just probably didn't want to pay a regular nurse to come and help with his parents. So he probably paid his kid to go over there. Oh,
probably did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way that he didn't pay for a nurse. And then I'm thinking, oh, wait, isn't she a nurse? And then it dawned on me, that's probably why she's over there all the time.
Oh, yeah. He can't deal with that.
And why we're hearing about the foods that his mom eats that he orders for. I mean, it's all like, well, I paid for it, so I'm going to talk about it on the air. Yeah. I mean, it's you just I don't want to enable this. I mean, and I wasn't petty about it whenever I quit they ask you questions about why you're leaving. I didn't get petty about it or anything because I quit the automated way where you just do the chat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I still will follow if there's something that's worthy that gets on the news or something like that. Of course, I'll follow. By the way, Adam Carolla mentioned that History Channel, I think, is doing a special on Howard Stern. Did you guys know about this?
I didn't know about that. I just knew about the Robin one that the rebels in the business whatever, and they were getting someone to play her as one of those reenactments and to discuss. Well, I don't remember when that happened or if that's happened.
Lizzo is too big a star, but I would recommend Lizzo to play Robin.
Oh, that would be
what were you
awesome.
Gonna say, Sue?
Twerking with that flute, fucking damn. That's so embarrassing. So Howard, what's his face? Jimmy Kimmel and Joe Buck were doing Monday Night Football hosting on the NFL. And when it was about to end, he said, when are you getting Howard out of the basement? Are you going to see him? Are you going to get him out of the basement? Is he ever going to come back to studio, basically? And you think Howard would be offended because Joe Buck's kind of making fun of what a Howard Hughes like figure he is. But instead, Howard was going on about how much do you think that plug was worth on Monday Night Football? A lot of people got to be listening to that. I mean, he was so thrilled to be mentioned on Monday Night Football.
Right, because somebody didn't tell him he's supposed to be offended by it.
Yeah, nobody. He was like happy.
Right. That's the narcissism, man. That's exactly what is supply. Any attention is good attention until a point. However, someone mentioned on the thread, one of the threads, that he had turned off his Google alerts, which was news to me. And the only reason to do that is because you couldn't take the barrage of negativity coming at you with Google.
Either that or it's so dry, tumbleweeds going by, that you go, you know what? Yeah. I'll turn it off and let myself think I'm getting alerted like crazy. I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the alerts like, oh, wait, that alert's for the blast. I paid for that one. Shit.
Well, it's going to be the equivalent of a dry reservoir and not visiting it for another couple weeks to see if the water's built up and maybe there's nothing there. Anyway, let's continue with Mr. Nukas.
Exhausted. I wanted to go home. He was coming on the air. He needed things to do.
It was unusual because Fred really, I always say this, but and maybe it's my fault, too, because I really don't have much social grace. Anybody who works with me knows I can't carry on a 2-minute conversation with people off the air. I don't know. I'm just too self-absorbed. But for some reason, Fred and I never really spent a lot of time talking. Even back then, I don't think we ever had a discussion about how we were going to conduct our professional lives on the air. We interacted with each other on the air, and I'd say, see you, man. And you go, okay, see ya. And to this.
But that's everybody. That he just said, I can't conduct more than a 2-minute conversation because I'm too self-absorbed. Yeah, that's everybody. The relationship with Fred is every relationship you have.
Yeah.
That's par for the course.
He also doesn't have an attention span. And that's, again, part of the narcissism. They can't focus. That's why he would dabble in guitar, dabble in piano, according to him in this Ben Stern eulogy, dabbled in clarinet. I couldn't stop laughing. My father said he paid $200 for clarinet. I did the math. If you add up inflation over the years, that was about the equivalent of $2,000 in 1965. That clarinet.
Wow.
Right. Wow. But he suffered, man. He was a have-not. So it's unbelievable. You think at some point, again, if you study the psychology of it all, which we've done a whole series on, you think at some point, if he's this bad now, was he much less worse? Like, was he less self-absorbed as let's say a 20-something-year-old? And the answer is no. He's always been this bad. So what in God's name would he have been like as a 9 and 10-year-old? Well, I guess the shut up, sit down clip explains that.
Yeah. I think too, when he says I can't have a 2-minute conversation with somebody off the air, but then you brand yourself as the world's best interviewer. And here's a book of all these. You're not interested in anything. You just said that. So how can you be a good interviewer if you're not curious?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's more than just not curious, but also I think he's nervous and awkward, and saying I'm self-involved is his cool therapy approach. In the end, it still makes him look cool in a way, like, oh, wow, because, a journalist hears that and goes, wow, how in touch you are with yourself. Yeah, really, if you were to say, I'm awkward, I'm not very bright, I'm constantly wondering if they're looking at my hair, and so focus on. It's very difficult to keep up this fake voice that I put on, and I have to jut my jaw out. It's a lot of work to look like this character I've created. So I'd just rather not do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Day, I don't think we had much discussion. There were a couple of years in there where we had more contact, where we traveled back and forth to work together. Fred would stay over my house sometimes. But there was never any real discussion about how to conduct this radio show. We didn't sit down and mastermind this thing. I knew what I had to do, and Fred just seemed to know what to do. If Fred didn't know what to do, I couldn't have worked with him.
So this is also, it goes to show you, he never pre-planned anything. It was always by the seat of his pants, just like just about any not talk show appearance. But when it came to work, how many times have we heard, I don't know, we didn't have a research department. We'd 5 minutes before a guest came in, we'd talk to each other and say, what do we know about Richard Lewis? What's been happening? And Gary would come in and offer his 2 cents. That's your research department. Baba Booey. Sam?
But yet he's always saying, I live and breathe the show. I think about it when I get out. I'm constantly thinking.
I'm a workaholic.
Yeah, but, in a way, though, it was better now that the getting things done crap happened, and that's the prep work. It's actually made the show worse. The spontaneity of the show was kind of what made it better than what we're getting now.
Yeah. It's never more obvious than when he has a return visitor on, or say like a whack packer, and he's talking to Beetlejuice as though they've just now met for the first time. It's got to be so, because I remember being stunned when I heard him post Getting Things Done interview Beetlejuice, and it's just like you know each other. What are you doing? I think Gilbert, he gave him the same treatment. But anyway, now that he's got, that safety net of things to read, with John Hine having coached him all the way through it, things to read, here's interesting tidbits. He's like, the rehearsed. That's another thing too. The rehearsed, is what they hit on, that he's so rehearsed now, thanks to therapy, thanks to having conducted so many interviews where he talks about himself, that for somebody like me who's looking for cracks in the armor, you really have to just go and spend the entire show looking and maybe find nothing, because he is so rehearsed. And, whatever torture that he shares with you, it's like, this is my polished torture. It's not real torture. So if you're looking for the kind of cracks, like I said, that I'm looking for, it's not worth the hunt sometimes. I'll have to listen to your summaries of the shows, I think, going forward.
When he comes back from vacation, Sirius will ID tag that show, and because it was a Ben Stern thing, he was going to do a eulogy. He was going to so-called eulogy. He was going to deliver. They were going to ID tag that, so there's no point putting it on YouTube, because they'll shut it down. But then when he has a guest in that's fairly high profile, that's another one. But when it's cleaning out the computer, Sirius doesn't seem to give a shit about that for the most part. Or Wilding's talking about some vacation you have. Usually they don't care about that content. But a musical guest, absolutely, that will be pre-recorded and ID tagged. So hence a lot of the reason why we had to go behind a paywall, because otherwise we have to edit that out or completely eliminate it. And I said, screw it. I want people to hear these things as we recorded them and edited them and presented them. Sam?
He reminds me of now a politician reading a teleprompter. Like a lot of what I see now in politics when people are giving speeches or whatever, not even speeches. Sometimes it looks like they're reading teleprompters just to have a meeting with people, and the press is in the room. It's like, you're reading off of something. I can tell, like, this is incredibly, it's so rehearsed that it's unbelievable. You can't have one free moment. And if you do, it's obviously a gaffe, and then that gaffe goes viral. I think Howard is a lot of the same way. It's a teleprompter all day.
Well, there's a reason why the comedy writers have decided when Howard's talking to a puppet, Howard is the straight man. So Howard just reads from his paper and go, that's outrageous. Oh, so I hear you went to this. And it's the driest, dumbest thing, but Howard's the straight man for the Donald Trump impersonator or whomever to bounce off of and show off, because he's the perfect straight man. He's not bright. He's not witty. and
then he won't step in it by saying it. Yeah, and then he won't step in it by saying anything that we're looking for.
This is, you guys want examples, everybody listening. If you want examples of Howard going off the cuff, well, first of all, let's say Roger Daltrey coming in and saying, where are the jokes? And you say, well, show me your cock. That's Howard not reading anything. That's the first thing that comes to his mind. I'm also like when the Red Hot Chili Peppers were just in not long ago. And when the questions, when they started mocking him and he was too stupid to realize they were mocking his questions. At one point, he's play that bass. Ooh, wow. What is that? What's that sound? What do you use? That's him off the cuff. Okay.
Fred didn't know what to do. I couldn't have worked with him.
He'd call me up. I'd be sleeping or something like that, drinking too much beer at college. That's what you do at college. You drink. You don't really study. He'd call me up and say, quick, in 5 seconds, you got to be Muhammad Ali. Call me up and go, quick, in 5 seconds, you have to be Howard Cosell. Be Richard Nixon, be pissed off about something. It's like, and it was always like, you got a 30-second, it's like Mad Libs, or it's like, like, whose line is it anyway? Okay, you're in a bar. You're Richard Nixon. You're pissed off about, Betty Ford. Now go. How the fuck am I going to, so you spend like 30 seconds waking up, maybe 30 seconds actually coming up with something that's funny, and 30 seconds saying goodbye.
Lovely. Thanks for sharing us your process. Now, what's your favorite sound?
There's a reason why they're not playing any of those clips.
I thought I was because they were not say. I was like, there's explaining this complicated process. Well, according to Fred, this hard task. Well, you guys have the audio, so play it if it's so amazing.
Yeah. And so the next clip is called Fred, and you have to know you're Jack Benny to get with this one. Fred is the resident Rochester.
Well, a lot of people seem to be struck by something that was in one of Howard's books about he helped me with my records. Meaning, Howard was doing his 6 to 10 or whenever he decided to shut up, much like today, radio show. Back then, it was Monday through Saturday. You had the lucky distinction of doing a 4-hour shift 5 days a week, and then having to do a 6-hour shift on Saturday, which is that's pretty much like South African diamond mining, where they're sending you down as like blood diamond.
26 hours of work.
That's nothing. What is he talking about? So a guy that's doing college and commuting, whatever, and then having to do an evening shift is cleaning up after a guy who is only working part-time and not doing anything. He's finished school.
Right.
Yeah, so wait, if he's doing 6 4-hour shifts, that's 24, plus 6 on Sunday, that's 30.
30. That's
not
part-time.
A full-time job. I mean, that might be just on the nose of full-time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is not a full-time job.
So King Baby, and he writes about it in, I believe, Private Parts, with his big OCD thing, which I don't want to bring up. I don't want to go into it. That's a whole other book. Yeah. But he does write about saying, I couldn't, if I started trying to clean it up, it would take me 4 hours, which was just complete bullshit. He was a lazy prick. Yeah, exactly. That's all it was. He's had people pick up after him his entire life for everything.
He's never
Why
not
would
had
that be any different?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Sam?
We also have to say, this is 30 hours of like sitting down or just cleaning up in one little area. It's not like you're dealing with the public. Like, you're not a waitress. You're not a bartender where it's physical and you're on your feet and you're go, go, go. Mm-hmm. This isn't like a taxing job necessarily. And physically.
he wasn't doing live calls on the air. That wasn't popular at this point. And, so if he did talk to a caller, it would have been recorded during a song and then clipped and then played in between.
Yep.
And, he was doing little bits here and there, but it's not like the ratio now where he's doing as much talking as he is and playing very little music.
Oh, yeah.
did they do crank calls back then? And then when did that switch where you had to announce that it was, you know how they can't do crank calls anymore because they have to announce that they're on the air or something?
Howard never did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering if Fred did.
No, the closest they got to any of that was not. It was all just supposedly parts for the 50 Ways to Rank Your Mother, or Unclean Beaver, as they released it later on. That stupid album of his where he's How Weird Stern and he's dressed up in leather and looks like Eugene Levy in the gay store in gay shop in Armed and Dangerous, and so he. But that's not those aren't crank calls. Those are just pre-planned, pre-recorded bits. So you're right. There's a time where the Tradio calls they had to announce that they were fake.
Well, Tradio you can do because you're calling into a public show. I mean, you're calling into a show that is broadcasting. So there's an expectation to be recorded.
Yeah.
But it has to do with consent of two-party consent where both people are. And I would have looked this up if I had known this was coming. But in any case, crank yankers can get away with it because in Nevada where they record that, only one party has to be aware that there's recording going on.
Yeah. I think Florentine said that there were only 2 states at that one point left where you could do it that way. Nevada was one, and maybe New Jersey or New York. I can't remember.
That does sound right. Yeah, it might be New Jersey.
Yeah, and that makes sense because he's from Jersey.
Right. And then whenever they call somebody who's not doing a public broadcast or podcast or whatever, they always have to call them back and get permission from that person before they can air it.
Release it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. He's like blood radio, if there is such a thing. And back then, Howard didn't have a support staff. He had no Gary. He had no Robin. He had no Artie. He had no me. Well, he kind of had me, but I was like working the overnights and going to college at the same time. Anyway, I'd maybe go next door after doing my air shift and also stick around and maybe do some voices while Howard was doing his show. And I come back in the room, and the place is a fucking mess. And I could see that he was kind of like busy, taping his phone calls. There was no such thing as delay or anything like that. You had to tape all your calls. It was on a reel-to-reel, and you had to switch switches. It's like, it's not like now, you have an engineer to do all that shit for you, or we do it live and we have a delay. It's like Howard was basically, he was basically the chef, the maitre d', the waitress, the guy who loaded the dishwasher, the guy who swept up.
Now, here's the thing, Fred, you idiot. If he really wanted to be in this business and that was what the business required at that time, and you don't have, and you're starting out, then that's what's necessary. You do it and you don't complain about it. And you certainly don't enlist an indentured servant to help you with it, and pay him and not pay him a dime for helping.
And this, again, shows Fred's naivete.
Yeah.
He thinks Howard was the only disc jockey in the country who was a one-man operation. I mean, his job was to play music. How difficult does how many staffers does he think he needs?
Yeah, absolutely.
How many people across the country were in the same exact spot and doing that for years? I mean, this is what it was. This is how inexperienced, though, that Fred is with broadcasting. And I think this is a dead giveaway because he always seems surprised by things, or he doesn't know things about the industry. They both are pretty naive when it comes to
And
that.
he actually sounds bitter about it, as if Howard was treated poorly by being expected to put away the records after you take them out.
Yeah. How dare you expect the Paul McCartney of radio to clean up after himself?
I know.
And furthermore, Fred, didn't you just do that for 6 hours? Weren't you the midnight to 6 a.m. man? Didn't you also have to put away records? And if you had any callers, tape them. But he acts, he's just a loyal lapdog at this point.
Lapdog.
So he knows it pleases the boss to hear this.
Other people are going to have to use that room on a different shift. Of course you clean up after yourself. Everybody does it. This isn't a surprise.
Right. I mean, can you imagine Howard having to look non-alphabetically for Pablo Cruz to get his jollies for the next air shift?
Or can you imagine if it was Imus or DeBella or somebody else who Howard had a war against, that Soupy Sales? They left their records out. This shows you how egotistical they are. This shows you how they demand everybody else cater to them. That's how he would have treated that.
Yep.
he was the whole restaurant, to use that metaphor. You know, he was doing it all. And I'd come in the room, and there were records all over the place. And I don't know, it's like, for some reason, I'm going, you know, this guy seems to be having a hard time in here. And it's like, what a fucking mess. Let me just, like, straighten this up a little bit, you know? It's like, you know, it's like if you see somebody kind of like, you know, drowning, I mean, wouldn't you, like, throw him a line or something like that? So it kind of looked like he was drowning in records. So basically, that's what I was doing, in addition to coming in a room and seeing if there was any other production that needed to be done.
Sam? So he had to give this whole exposition about how hard Howard was doing everything, made him seem like this multitasking maniac who had the weight of the world on his shoulders. And how could he possibly pick up a record and put it away?
Yeah. When really, Fred, he just made you his work wife. Now you're Allison for him. When he gets to work, you pick up after me. You come up with ideas for me to do. You know, Fred just explained how he was doing all these voices for Howard, and now he has to put away all the records because Howard was so overworked.
Yep.
You just became an unpaid executive assistant. Like, why are you doing that?
Yep. And
dummy?
we get back to our good friend Elliot Gould, who takes us back to reality with mild-mannered Zvi off the air.
For all the bathroom humor that Howard displayed and the gross obsessions he would share with his listeners years later, he achieved a level of consistency at WCCC that translated into an even-tempered disposition off the air.
So the next 3 paragraphs are completely excised from the audiobook. So I'll read the first one. And Sam, you want to do the second one?
Sure.
And Ben, you could do the last. Howard's affect was rather gentle and thoughtful and at odds with the culture of rock radio, said Colin McEnroe, a columnist with the Hartford Courant, who at the time counted the city's radio beat among his duties at the paper. He was, on and off the air, a mannerly guy, so that when I heard years later about all the appalling things he was doing, I made a few inquiries to be sure it was the same Howard Stern.
McEnroe added, "It's fair to say that he wanted me to know about what he was doing. But he was never obnoxious about it. He'd call up and say, here's something you might want to know about."
Mm-hmm.
When Nozal left the station with a bad case of radio burnout, that's the guy who Howard had on the birthday show who said,
we taught you how to steal.
You didn't teach it. We taught you how to steal.
Yep.
He said, okay, when Nozal left the station with a bad case of radio burnout, early in 1980, Howard accompanied him to the unemployment office and in the days that followed demonstrated concern by keeping in contact with his former boss.
Yeah, and the next paragraph, in the company of the overnight disc jockey Hal Lichtenbaum, known on the air as Lich, Howard took up racquetball. They played late. Can't even imagine that these days. They played late afternoon games at Rollout in Rocky Point. Although Howard has maintained that WCCC was an intolerable slave pit, Lick remembers that he and Howard were so passionate about the radio business that they endlessly discussed ways to improve the station. We talked about it as if it were our home and how we wanted to set it apart in the market, Lick said. And so here's the next clip, guys. Let's see what we got here. Shitting on WCCC.
Well,
so that's... sorry.
This
Sam?
goes like, so the narrative of the slave pit, I mean, why do you want to make it sound like you're this oppressed worker versus you're this
up and coming
who's like thinking about it nonstop and really you can't have it like both ways. There can't be both narratives. Like,
well, he always has to be
you or they're letting you be creative and you're building a market. I mean, which is it?
He's always got to be a victim. It's always got to be some kind of siege mentality. Otherwise, it's not heroic. If you're just a regular schmo doing your thing and learning your craft and being influenced by people and in turn, you know, making your own way, and what do bands do? Copy off. They cover bands that they love and then eventually develop their own style. The Beatles are a perfect example. The Stones even more so. And then you wean off the covers and you start writing your own music. He should be the same way. And he should be more he should be more humble about it, but he doesn't have humility. We know that already. So and it doesn't sound like the same way Robin needed a parade with MMA fighters and had to wear boxing gloves and put the stupid Muhammad Ali thing. It couldn't just be, you know what, I got lucky and I hooked up with the right guy and we became popular, and she doesn't want, because she knows her story is much like his. You both stumbled upwards.
Mm-hmm.
In, with the right amount of luck and the right amount of people around you, and counting on other people to not treat you as shitty as you treated them when you stole their material.
That's the combination of three there. That combination really is it.
Yeah.
And you know how he said Nozell, that guy that Nozell left the station, and he said he demonstrated concern by keeping in contact with his former boss. Now, when have you ever seen Howard demonstrate concern for anybody? There has to be an ulterior motive, like,
definitely.
Sure, you're not telling people I'm stealing. Are you making sure
Nozell used to go in.
What can you do for me? Maybe there has to be some sort of ulterior motive. He doesn't have concern.
No.
They used to write. Nozell would have him on the phone and discuss bits with him. So I'm sure they would listen to the Steve Dahl stuff to say, here's what we can take from it. Yep. And, that's my supplier.
Well, this is why I think that word choice is interesting. Demonstrate concern, not have concern.
Right.
Yeah. It was the worst station. I mean, the station didn't even have great ratings, right?
Never.
That's what used to kill my ratings in the morning. Thank God I got out of there.
And they always used to have
No. That's not how it works. The morning guy establishes the ratings for the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
You don't get to say, I didn't have ratings because Fred didn't have ratings at midnight.
The overnight
to 6.
guy was to blame.
Yeah, I mean this expression in radio, this old expression that I read was, as the morning goes, so goes the day. So if the morning does well, the day will follow. But if you can't get ratings in the morning, you're not going to get it for the rest of the day. Yeah. And you cannot blame the midnight to 6 guy for you not having ratings.
Yeah.
I know.
In TV, there's a little more. It's a little more merit based in TV, but it's the lead-ins would dictate sometimes how successful a show would be, and that's why when they moved certain shows like Seinfeld, they became more popular because that's the number one example I can think of off the top of my head. But there are loads of shows that were destroyed when we switched schedules, and other shows that thrived when they switched where they were placed during the week. Sam?
It's kind of like morning shows. You know how the Today Show used to be the juggernaut with like Matt Lauer and Katie Couric or whatever? Mm-hmm. Or, then people would stick with that programming after they were off the air. They didn't suddenly just like switch to CBS or something. They kept going with that show. So it is true. The morning, who the fuck is listening to the radio at midnight and thinks, you know what?
I'm turning it off now.
I should just forget sleep today and, keep going.
Right.
Yeah. In my research, I read an interview.
Go ahead.
I read a quote from Steve Dahl when he was, Howard's age at this point, when he was doing mornings in Chicago. And he said he wants to do mornings because he doesn't want anyone else to get credit for the ratings. Where if you do it any other time of the day, they can give the credit to your lead-in. But there's no lead-in really for the morning guy. So that's where you go when you really want to prove yourself. And Howard's first one to blame everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Book, and it was always the same.
Always after the rating book, the program director would blame us.
You're talking too much.
Yes.
I was just thinking about this. What is it? A bunch of hookers with transistor radios saying, you know what, I'm done for the day. I'm not. So 6 a.m. rolls around. Fuck this shit.
You're not playing, and I go, I think if I talked a little more, we might get some really decent ratings. I think if I stop playing a little less Marshall Tucker Band and Pure Prairie League.
So that's that. And then this one is that asshole Ben Stern and his fatherly advice.
One of the things that I noticed, whenever he went from WRNW and he went up to Connecticut, I think WCCC, and the only time I could hear it, we'd visit him and he would play tapes for me. And I never forget this. I remember he took out this tape and I listened to it. It was an interview. He went out on the street or someplace. I listened to this whole thing and said, this is terrific. Don't give it up. Because he did it on his own time. They didn't pay him for it. I says it's worth the whole job. Because he was on the air 5 days. They sat on you, and he couldn't really be that creative. But when he went out, he could be creative. And I liked the way he did it. Don't forget, he wasn't in the business that long. And I said, this interview is wonderful. Just make sure you keep doing it.
Yeah, and the next clip is called Great Bits Like This, Mr. Stern.
Very
Okay, now I got my tape recorder out here. Now, supermarkets are a great place to meet women. Take my word for it. Now, just don't come on too strong. You sort of casually bump your shopping cart into hers, and then you comment on some of the food items. Now, let me show you what I mean, okay? Oh, excuse me. Boy, do you believe these melons? My, they're expensive.
No, I really like the fact that you care about food. A lot of guys just don't spend the time to comparison shop. You're my kind of guy. Let's get together. Your place or mine.
That's the only clip I could find from him at WCCC, and that's on YouTube.
Isn't that it? Isn't that something?
Yeah,
that's
I don't know.
History of Howard Stern.
Yeah.
That tells a lot about why it's kind of erased off the internet, because that is You're talking about fruit.
No. You're talking about how expensive fruit is. So you're being a cheapskate. Can you believe how expensive? But you're saying melons because you're being double entendre guy.
Right.
But you're also being the cheap guy. Can you believe how expensive melons are?
Yeah. So the next one is called Early Rating Success.
As far as the rival WHCN was concerned, Howard had succeeded in setting himself apart. The proof was in the ratings.
Guys, I don't know why I forgot to make that cut, but there's 2 paragraphs missing, so I'll read them really quickly. After trailing WCC in several ratings periods, WHCN tied its rival in the Arbitron Company's April-May survey of 1979. However, in the October-November ratings, a surge in Howard's numbers to a 3.2% share of the morning listening audience during a so-called average quarter hour helped WCCC to pull far ahead of WHCN once again. He was not kicking ass in Hartford, but he was a master of getting press and creating a stir, said Bob Bittens, who was then WHCN's overnight disc jockey and later the station's program director. So and when you hear that clip at the second part, as a result, they took steps to remove him from WHCC, even though Howard was none the wiser. So then the next clip is going to to explain exactly what you'd said many years ago, actually, about radio tricks and how to keep your guy at number one or keep your show at number one.
Yep.
And it's actually ingenious when you think about it.
Yeah.
You're right, which is that you take the competition, use your connections to get him out of that market and into another market.
That's right.
And,
they get paid more, but you're actually, whatever it is, you both win. Like, they get more money. They have to move somewhere else. Your show is saved. Like, you get your ratings back, perhaps. That's a tactic, I suppose. Right.
And these ratings, they say that like a point in the ratings could be like $50,000 in advertising revenue.
Yes.
So they were really they watched these points and they teetered every single, just so everybody knows, and because I've just done a lot of reading about this kind of stuff. These ratings books, they would fluctuate like crazy. So you could be number one in your genre, let's say, because usually number one might be like the news, not necessarily a personality.
Yep.
And these radio guys usually were not personalities. It was rock radio with a DJ.
Yeah.
But it could be as simple as the competitor market invested a ton of money in bumper stickers, T-shirts, and concert giveaways, and then they surged ahead of you in the ratings. So it had nothing to do with your supermarket cheapskate guy bit or whatever. There's so many factors going on because in the end, it's a pursuit of advertising dollars.
Yes, at that time especially.
And so
Sam?
then what did it was like a shell game with these radio DJs to keep them at number one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. So these consultants would find DJs in one market and move them to another market. They would have all these different, they would be independent contractors, I guess, or freelancers so they'd have connections and they'd be aware that somebody in DC, let's say, is looking for somebody, and they know that Howard, who they had just placed in Detroit, is now the victim of a country music swap where they've got format change. So they just and then these guys get their headhunting bonus for placing them in this market. And Howard stayed in touch with the guy who placed him in Detroit, because that guy helped place him in DC.
I forgot about that aspect completely. The fact that getting the person, finding the person might get you some money as well. And that you're getting money the money is from all angles.
Yeah. And to underscore how unimportant personality really was.
Yeah.
It could just be like, was there a blip in the ratings where at the time when that person was there? Okay, we'll take him. And the station manager might never even have heard this guy before.
Yes,
but
that's right.
I mean, that was the case in DC. The owner hadn't even heard Howard before.
Yep.
But there was a blip in the ratings. We did, or basically, you didn't bleed out as fast as we thought you would. So therefore, you're a success.
Yeah.
In the case of Detroit, that's how it goes.
And we didn't even know, like, maybe they had a concert giveaway tickets, like, because I remember I would listen to certain radio shows in the morning if they were giving away concert tickets to try to call in and win. But then I'd never listen to the station otherwise. So you're right. There could be some gimmick going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this next clip is called "Sounds Like the Howard Stern Show Today."
Really?
In Hartford. I don't know what he does now. Hey, Brian.
Hey.
This guy's funny. This guy, you got to hear this. I was doing morning radio in Connecticut. And I'm on the air, and I hated it because...
If I remember this correctly, they're going to slip into Steve Dahl's Chicago guy accent as they start talking to each other. The same voice that Howard uses every time he does from Johnny Fratto to Agent Marty Gold.
Yep.
Yeah, to Agent Marty Gold. It's the Steve Dahl Chicago guy accent that Steve Dahl was doing because he was in Chicago.
And I have clips to compare the two. Good. One's a song. But it is Steve Dahl
Little
doing
Anthony?
Yeah.
Anthony
And then so I want people definitely got to hear the comparison because I mean that's the mandate.
And there's
here.
no reason for Howard to have a Chicago accent up his sleeve.
None whatsoever. No.
Really?
In Hartford. I don't know what he does now. Hey, Brian.
Hey.
This guy's funny. This guy, you got to hear this. I was doing morning radio in Connecticut, and I'm on the air, and I hated it because I was the morning guy. I had to back time into Paul Harvey. Then I had to go collect local news, and I had to be the newsman and the funny, stupid DJ and play records, and no producer, nothing. So you were working your tail off. It was actually like physical labor.
Wow.
It was a real job.
One time, this guy walks in, and he's a big guy. I'm in the middle of trying to back time into Paul Harvey. Isn't that when you did this?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You mind me telling this?
No, go ahead.
All right. All of a sudden, he whips it out while I'm opening the mic, and he lays it down right on the console.
Oh, no.
So I'm on the air, and I'm going, and I'm trying to back time. And you got to understand, these guys would fire you if you didn't back time right. I'd get yelled at for this. So I'm like, okay, everybody, WCCC. All of a sudden, I look over, this guy's schlong, and I'm like, oh, my God. And I take a record album, and I swat his wiener. I go to swat his wiener. He pulled it away quick. I almost got him in the wiener. This is all going on while I'm doing the show.
That queer put his wiener on.
Hey, you queer, what do you got the wiener out there for, boy?
Yeah. Now they're doing the Chicago guy.
Yeah, badly.
I'm noticing him slipping into this almost instinctually. That's how much he stole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Robin kind of introduced the queer that in the background. You could hear her go Chicago first, and Robin has no reason to have a Chicago guy impression.
Right. And just one moment, I'll cue up the.
It's like Madonna when she started, having an English accent one day, and we were all supposed to think that's fine. Like, you want us to go along with this fraud? You married an English guy. You're not English. That's not how this works.
So, guys, we're going to compare the Millie Bobby Brown voice. I could get a Johnny Fratto clip really quickly, but I'm not going to bother because
you guys don't know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, here's him with the Millie Bobby Brown.
Torture.
Yeah, we're going to compare it with Steve Dahl.
And, listen, thank God she's growing up nice. She's not getting any of that awkward stage like that lispy kid.
Yeah, she doesn't look awkward. You're right.
I said to her, Millie, we can't tolerate you having some sort of awkward stage. You got to do a Brooke Shields and just be hot from the time you're a little girl to the time you're a woman.
Okay, so there's
By
that.
the way, even the Chicago thing is so creepy. I hate that bit.
Well, who thinks of agents and going, oh, they're usually from Chicago, these slick Hollywood agents? No.
So this is a song parody. Steve Dahl it did as a character, Little Anthony, and it's called,
Anthony DiGiovanni was one of his characters.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I mean, you guys pretty much get the
I wish that
comparison.
there was a clip where he was actually just talking instead of singing, but you get it. I mean, it's really hard to find Steve Dahl stuff. We were just discussing this before.
Yep.
So you have to take what you can get.
So go ahead.
He made that character though. You know, he is from Chicago, but having that, you know, really that character with a more pronounced Chicago accent, and he developed these characters. Howard is stealing not only the voice but stealing the ideas of characters from Steve Dahl. That's fucking terrible.
Steve's not from Chicago. He's from California, and so he observed the Chicago accent as an outsider would, and exaggerated it for comedic effect. And Howard, not understanding that's not just something you take that regional thing and apply it to wherever you need it. That doesn't become the Hartford cab driver voice. That's a Chicago voice.
That's right. And so one of the clips I wanted to play is him talking from 2010, the Vietnam vet thing that he stole from the Greaseman. Yeah. But badly. So just gonna play that really quickly.
So somebody made a mistake and they figured it out. That's all. She's not traumatized. You want to be traumatized? I'll show you how to get traumatized. Spend a year in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Go to Afghanistan, you'll be traumatized. So you fucking lost your job and they figured out that you shouldn't have. Go take the fucking job.
You act as if it's so easy.
Get over it.
Everybody should get over it. You can't get over anything.
I get over everything. I'm a trooper. I'm a soldier. That's why there's a Howard Stern show. I'm a soldier.
You sit here and whine all day about it.
When I was in Vietnam, for 3 years of my life. I did 4 active duty tours. What do you think? I liked everything I did over there? I did it. When your CO tells you to go do something, you do it. It's 36 fucking months of my life over there, that hellhole.
How did he get away with this?
Well, this supposedly he did it much earlier than this, and it's in private parts of the movie.
Well, that's what makes it legal suddenly. He shows himself inventing it, and therefore my follow-up in DC, which was the Greaseman, couldn't have invented it, because if you watch Private Parts, you'll see I invented it, and that I had long hair.
So here's the video section. Oh, actually, I shouldn't play it, but go ahead.
Isn't there some sort of stolen valor thing? You can't do that?
No, I don't think there's. I don't think there's an intellectual property aspect of this stuff, other than people who know and say you're stealing. This is wrong. But I don't think there's an intellectual property to. Every impression that Fred was doing was a Dan Aykroyd impression from Saturday Night Live. Right. So, Dana Carvey's George Bush set the tone for how George Bush impressions are. So anyway, I don't think there's an intellectual property that's being, you could just say you're a thief and they are a thief.
I know, but I'm saying for Vietnam, saying you're a soldier, isn't that how you can't impersonate a police officer and you'll get arrested for doing that? Can you impersonate pretending you're a soldier?
I think you can. I think there's plenty of homeless guys who get away with that.
Crazy.
Yeah. I'm sure that's the case. Anyway, the Greaseman had a series. He still has a website that looks like it was straight out of 1995. And he sells the best of the Greaseman, which was released in the late 80s, 88 or something. And the character was called Sergeant Fury, based on a Marvel Comics character, actually. And he's the Vietnam vet. And he was
doing this.
10 years early.
He was doing this when it was right following after the Vietnam War.
Right.
So
late
Howard
70s
doing
or
it in the 90s really,
That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Man, enjoying my Labor Day. I know where I'm going today. A lot of people be out mingling, hitting the beach, working with family and friends, enjoying the last summer. But no, I ain't going to be hanging out with any of my friends. Today I'll be remembering some of my friends. Remembering. I'm going to the monument today. The Vietnam Memorial Monument. I was there the other day.
At any rate, so that's kind of the genesis of almost every bit.
And like,
well, yeah, it's not
it's an interesting character too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the point of his though was his were little stories where he would tell what happened, and they always ended with a punchline.
Yes.
So it would be Howard only took the graphic stuff, like, oh yeah, I had gook earrings. I took their ears and I made a necklace out of them or whatever. He only took the parts that he remembered, which was the offensive stuff. But, I only am vaguely familiar with these, but I went through and listened to a bunch of them years ago. Mm-hmm. And his would build up to this payoff that always made him look like a terrible, reckless, dangerous soldier responsible for all kinds of catastrophe, even as he remembered it heroically, or would remember it with this kind of reverence. But it always ended with him being a shithead, doing everything that was really bad. But it's all done comedically and told in this way that it was scripted and there were sound effects and so on. Howard just recalled, oh, I liked when he said I had earring, the necklace is made from this, so I'll take that. And I'll give you a theory here. So in order for Howard to become number one in DC, they had to buy the Grease Man because the Grease Man was preventing him from being so they had to say, look, we're going to hire you and move you to afternoons. Therefore, Howard can be number one. And I think that Howard took that bit basically of saying, like, we own you now. Yep. My station owns you and I own your stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is he was ready to go to Canada, to get out of the draft if he had to. Yeah.
Right.
So
could you imagine him as an actual soldier? Holy Christ.
That wig would be a target big time. Let's see. The next one, I don't know why I wrote Ohio, but it's supposed to be Adios, Connecticut. The Motor City awaits.
Radio consultant Dwight Douglas.
I listened to the tape and I thought, there's something here. There's something going on. So I called Howard Stern and asked him to give me a complete package, and he was very efficient. And after listening to the tapes, it struck me that he was kind of like Alan Alda on acid.
They had a job opening in Columbus for a really good Burkhardt Abrams station, highly rated. I was a little nervous. I like to go to a toilet bowl and bring up the ratings. And I got in touch with the PD, and he was interested in me, and then his morning show agreed to stay. They worked out a deal.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because it was going to be a bump over to Columbus, but then it ended up being Detroit. That's why I wrote it that way. But that one follows that should follow the next clip that we're going to play. But for some reason I have them disorganized. Ben?
Yeah. So what he just said was, I was nervous about going there because they had good ratings, and I like to go to a toilet bowl and bring up the ratings. Now, I just want to point out, the only job he had before this job at WRNW did not get Arbitron ratings. They were too small of a station. They didn't have ratings.
Right.
When he went to Hartford, he was only in Hartford, meaning only working in a station that even gets ratings for 11 months total.
Yeah.
So, and as you saw, he peaked at a 3.2 share.
Yes.
So, out of every 100 radios, 3 were listening to him in any given 15 minutes. So maybe he brought it up, but what's fewer than 3 radios turned on to your station? 2, 1?
Yeah, yes.
But anyway, it's not like he had this long track record behind him of joining toilet bowl stations and skyrocketing them. But before we move on to leave Hartford, I would love to go and do a comparison for everybody when you're ready.
Yeah.
To show where Steve Dahl was in his career at this time and where Howard Stern was in his career. Okay.
By all means.
Well, all right, first I want to set a little character scene.
Okay.
Because this is the first time Howard has ever been in the news, and it was February 1978 when he was at WRNW, and this is the New York Times, and I'm just going to give you a quick little read because I just want to compare how Howard was at this time and how Steve Dahl was at this time. So here's February 1978. The program director, Howard Stern, echoes Schreier's statement about wanting college coverage on the news station. Here's Howard's quote. There's been a complete void in covering any kind of local issues, everything from local government to happenings in the schools, just taking calls, speaking to people, finding out what Westchester's needs are. Mr. Stern said, that's our edge. That's the difference. He hopes to give the station an identity. He sees the station's function as providing entertainment and information. We want to have a definite sound. We want people to turn on WRNW and know right away, that's WRNW. That's my station. I like it. Mr. Stern, a morning disc jockey, became station programmer when on-air personalities Joseph Piasek and Meg Griffin resigned from WRNW in November. Harris Allen, like Mr. Stern, is in his early 20s, has replaced Miss Griffin as music director. Mr. Allen would not care to label the station's sound as, quote, light, soft, or mellow. He does admit that some popular artists, such as The Who and the Rolling Stones, have been virtually eliminated from the available music library. However, this results from the fact that the songs do not reflect the new R&W sound. The station still plays mainly album cuts. Okay, so that's Howard Stern, and at almost exactly the same time, 3 months later in Chicago, this is what's going on with Steve Dahl. DJ Steve Dahl hits FM airwaves with Rock of Humor. I'm just going to read some highlights from this article. Dahl is Minkow is the name of the station manager, I believe. His last name is Minkow. Jack Minkow. Yeah, he's the station manager. Dahl is Minkow's bonus baby, his bid to put WDAI-FM on top of the morning ratings heap among 18 to 34-year-old FM listeners. Dahl did it for 2 stations in Detroit before moving to Chicago in January, and Minkow is betting his corporate points at ABC headquarters in New York that Dahl will do the same for WDAY and AI in Chicago. For Dahl, who is only 23, and was once described by a Detroit writer as a Botticelli cherub with aviator glasses, the move has been a big one. 3 years ago, he was making $3 an hour as an expendable disc jockey in Bakersfield, California. Under his 3-year contract with WDAI, he is making $52,000. Keep in mind, Howard was making $12,000 in Hartford.
Right.
He was making $52,000 the first year. Younger than Howard, by the way. With annual increments that will take him up to $60,000 and beyond. Minkow claims that makes Dahl the highest paid morning FM radio personality in the country. The usual fare, this is talking about Steve's show, between lots of pre-programmed album-oriented rock consists of a few unusual audience response segments and dialogue between the dozen or so imaginary characters Dahl does. Among the regular routines are Go Back to Bed with Dahl arranging for a day off for a sleepy voice secretary or computer programmer, Ball Out the Boss, which gives employees a chance to sound off on their employer's peccadillos, and Steve Dahl's Dating Game, in which Dahl has men calling on one line and women on the other while he randomly pushes buttons arranging on-air conference calls among the 3 of them. Typical prizes for winners: 2 TV dinners, a bottle of Skid Row cheap wine, and 2 tickets to a triple X-rated film. But much of the show's humor comes from Dahl's quick wit. The interplay between the characters, Dahl, and the audience is what most amuses listeners. While Baba Ganoush, that's one of his characters, was giving a back rub via telephone to an art gallery owner who called in Rex, that's Steve Dahl's gay character, who Howard would later invent 3 years later, could be heard in the background hyperventilating with excitement. Baba apologized to the gallery owner for using only one hand because he had to use the other to hold Rex back. Another part of Dahl's appeal is what seems to be his unpredictability, a natural consequence of a show that is half planned and half improvised. Many of Dahl's double entendres are full of sexual innuendo. WDAI has already spent $100,000 promoting Dahl. Minkow said if he can deliver 50% of what he was doing in Detroit, then he's worth a fortune to us. Dahl's April media stat ratings were triple what they were in March. According to WDAI program director Roger Skolnick, but the first real test will be the Arbitron ratings. The first one for Dahl's brief tenure will come out in June. Just to let you know, he shoots to number 1. At least, at number 2. Ties for number 2, I guess, in the market. And this is before, by the way, this is while he's at WRNW. This is while he's at WRNW. So Howard's not even. Yeah, Howard's not even in Hartford yet. So this is still just before he joins Hartford. Disc jockey, this is August 15th of 78. Disc jockey Steve Dahl returned to Detroit from his now $60,000 a year job to get married, and share some specifics. For example, the Chicago stations that grabbed Dahl spent more than $100,000 in research to find out what Dahl's appeal to Detroiters was.
Yep.
The Frank Magid research firm found that Dahl's Detroit audience was the new blue-collar worker, a hip and socially aware high school graduate with an income right at the U.S. average. The researchers also found that Dahl generated incredible loyalty. If he was not on the air, his audience didn't listen to the radio at all. Outside of driving a new BMW, how is Dahl doing in Chicago? While he's only been there for 7 months, already WDAI has moved from 5th to 1st with 18 to 24-year-olds during Dahl's morning shift. The station has also climbed from 14th to 8th with a broader range of listeners. So just to fill you in now, in December of that year, and if you guys want to interrupt, go right ahead or cut in at all.
I was going to say the 18 to 34 demo, if like anybody follows ratings and TV, that's like the most coveted age group of people for advertisers. I know that much. And I also think that, you know, at least for the characters that you talked about, Howard has completely ripped, and the games.
Oh, there'll be more.
So this is just unbelievable. And what did Howard want to do? He wanted to take the cool records off. He wants to basically be like Q102.5 or something, like some soft Delilah rock crap. And then he wants to add news and
about the community.
What?
Yeah, about the community. Community affairs. Okay, so in December of that year, 1978, Steve loses his job because the station switches formats, which is common in radio, and especially at that time, rock. So this time it goes from rock to disco.
Yep.
When Howard loses his job, it goes from rock to country. So anyway, it goes from rock to disco. In March of the following year, 1979, which is just a month before Howard starts in Hartford, Steve gets hired at WLUP. And by the way, that's the station where Howard would first become syndicated to in Chicago and end up wishing aides on the program director and all that kind of stuff. That's where Steve begins to play disco records interrupted by explosion sound effects.
Yep. And
then in April, Howard starts working in Hartford. So this is June, just a couple months later. This is a news story. June 10th. Steve Dahl, general of the, quote, Insane Coho Lips anti-disco group and DJ for WLUP radio, arrived at Point East Linwood last Sunday in a Jeep and was dressed in army attire. He and the popular local rock band Cartoon drew a crowd that exceeded all records in South Suburbia. More than 2,000 fans were unable to gain entrance to the already overcrowded club. Many had camped in the club's parking lot since early afternoon, spending the time drinking beer and barbecuing. Linwood police, fearing a riot, called for assistance that drew help from as far as Crown Point, Indiana, and Frankfort. Mark Ittersagen, promotions manager, said no one was hurt, no damage was done, and no arrests were made. All we got was a big mess and a lot of publicity. So this is the beginning, I just want to set the stage, of Steve Dahl using theatrics that Howard will later use. In this case, it's dressing up like an army guy to go out, and he smashes disco records over his head. But
that's what Howard did. He did the same thing.
I just want to say the popularity of Steve Dahl, they had never seen before in Chicago. So let me just go on. This is July 28th, 1979.
Hold on. Before you go into that, I just want to preface, people have to also understand the context of disco was so polarizing in the late 70s that it was literally a talking point for so many people that fuck disco sucks. That became a new there's loads of t-shirts actually. And there's one famous one where he's wearing that actually, Steve Dahl, that
disco
t-shirt.
Sucks. Yeah.
Disco sucks. And people were like vehemently, there was a deep hatred of it in the music industry as well, because it was replacing musicians because they were using.
And if you remember, Howard made money on the side at WRNW by going to the Holiday Inn and playing disco music because none of the other DJs wanted to do it. And so he's the like picket line crosser guy who goes, I'll do it.
Yep.
So he would go there and play disco when people with integrity said, no, this is not for me.
That's why Meg Griffith and
Griffin.
Griffin, sorry, Meg Griffin. I'm thinking of like Peter Griffin, the Family Guy. She was a music person. She liked the rock and roll. She cared very much about music and was into music, not like Howard. And so when they were like, we're going to change, he was like, I'll be the corporate shill. I'll do whatever.
One of my favorite stories in the book was how he got chased out of a dance, like he was supposed to DJ somewhere and he didn't know how to play dance records. He just played the Beatles album.
The Beatles, yeah,
all the way through. Could you?
I know. I know. Imagine you're there with your cocaine spoon and you're ready for your leisure suit and you're like the Beatles. This is not even the same decade.
It's not even right. Exactly. All of a sudden, Here, There, and Everywhere comes on.
Yeah, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
This is to build up, Phil, more to the audio clips that I sent you that you could pick and choose from. But this is basically just to lead up to, this is where Howard as Morning Man and Steve as Morning Man are now operating at the same time. But until now, the most outrageous thing Howard has done was say the song 4 Strong Winds. Maybe it's he had a bad dinner last night. Something like that. That was his joke about Neil Young. That was the most outrageous he'd been, was making a comment about the song title 4 Strong Winds. Sounds like he had a meal that didn't agree with him.
Right.
So this is Steve. I'll just read this right before you lead into that.
No worries. I'm just going to cue it up.
Yeah. Disco music is a disease, the heavy young man in the bizarre military uniform declared. Steve was like 200 pounds.
Yeah.
I call it disco dystrophy. It's an affliction where you're forced to wear white 3-piece suits, blow dry your hair for 2 hours, do certain dances in a sexually extroverted manner, and wear a cocaine spoon around your neck. The people victimized by this killer disease walk around like zombies. We must do everything possible to stop the spread of this plague. The diatribe belongs to Steve Dahl, the morning man and resident comic at WLUP-FM, a popular Chicago radio station. Besides his daily radio gig, Dahl is a commanding general of the insane Coho Lips anti-disco army, a group of pure rock and roll fans dedicated to eliminating disco dystrophy in our lifetime. In the last couple of months, Dahl's 7,000-member army has staged 3 raucous anti-disco rallies, destroyed thousands of disco albums, pelted disco fans with marshmallows, repeatedly assaulted the disco van of a rival radio station. So he invented basically these rival radio wars.
Yeah.
Because the disco stations that he was making fun of felt, including the one who fired him, so it was personal, felt under attack because his fans are throwing marshmallows at them. I mean, it's pretty harmless.
Funny.
But pelted with marshmallows, repeatedly assaulted the disco van of a rival radio station with WLU. Oh, yeah, they put stickers on it and triggered a huge mob scene at Comiskey Park that resulted in the Chicago White Sox losing a game by forfeit.
Yep.
So you want to play the clip.
Wait.
Yeah. Before we do that, go ahead, Sam.
You think about this and how Howard absolutely took this whole identity. And what was he doing? He was reaching out to college kids who are the most, narcissistic, progressively thinking. They're not the anti-hero. They're the disco warriors. They're they're not. It's completely the antithesis, but he realizes the popularity and what Dahl was doing and commanding the lead of being the anti. And also, Steve was talking to, what did they say? They said the middle class worker, that the blue collar
guy. The new blue collar guy. Yeah.
Do you think a blue collar guy is going to listen to what a bunch of college fucks have to say? No, they don't care. They don't want to hear that. Nobody with a pail and a lunchbox at a fucking construction site wants to hear about a college kid thinks at all.
Right. And so when we you guys, again, everything is contextual, guys. You have to understand what it was about getting headlines from just saying to the listeners, anything that would get you headlines would get you more attention and hence more ad revenue, because more listeners, even if they hate you. And that was the key. Howard was polarizing audiences eventually, but that's what Steve Dahl did as well. So eventually something like this disco demolition at Comiskey Park, it made him absolutely a huge name across the country.
Yeah.
Right. And Howard stole his audience then, like by transferring his away from the college guy, the college girl, and that sort of upper echelon people who go to college. He took the blue collar audience, like he stole Steve Dahl's blue collar audience,
Well, it was a question of markets. Like, I don't recall that Steve Dahl ever syndicated outside. I think once he got to Chicago, that was the apex of his career.
No. I'll fill you in on that.
Okay.
But just so you know, he was simulcast. His Chicago show
it was
later on becomes simulcast to Detroit and to Milwaukee. And the Friday before, he was scheduled to go to Los Angeles. So he was opposite Howard. So they were in the same market at the same time. Right. The day he was scheduled to go to Los Angeles and Kentucky, they pulled him off the air because they couldn't come to terms with the contract.
Yes.
So he was simulcasting in different cities and about to go. I mean, the closest to national, about 10 years before Howard did.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Even though Howard invented it, Steve was doing it for years before Howard did.
And
Sam?
then, so you also, Steve Dahl can speak to this audience of blue collar people. Meanwhile, Howard, what was his initial want? He wanted to speak to these elite college kids. So he never was the blue collar guy. I mean, he never has been either. There is no experience in that realm.
I just go back to Howard being a malleable puppet. Yep. And so the new owners wanted a certain kind of advertiser, and they said, okay, well, then we have to have this kind of audience, and the audience that we want listens to Steely Dan and Fleetwood Mac and whatever was the Billy Joel, whatever was soft rock king at the time.
Limp Shit.
That's what we'll play. And Howard says, I'm the world's only music DJ who doesn't like music, so I'll play whatever you like. And
Bee Gees forever.
Yeah, if you want to go disco, because I'll play disco, and I don't care. My ear can't tell the difference. I don't know what you even mean by genre. I don't know what you're talking about.
I can't even fathom being a fan of radio, claiming to love radio, but hating music.
And not being able to cite anybody as an influence or somebody you liked. So you love radio, except everything about radio.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, so here we go with a little bit of disco demolition, guys. Here's for the clips from the actual footage.
Time for Brad Palmer Sport.
Many of the fans are scattering off the field now when they sight the police. And many SOC security members are joining the police, which are now about 40 or 50, and they're rapidly walking out the center field where the fire is burning. The fans are now streaming off the field in great numbers, and I doubt if very few will be left to confront the police as they come in helmet and nightstick gear.
That was on the field.
So they're burning disco records and destroying them, actually, and they're
the fans in the audience rushed the field, which was not supposed to happen, and they lit it on fire.
Yeah.
And there's police there.
Yeah.
Games of a doubleheader at Comiskey Park last night as White Sox owner Bill Veeck went a promotion too far. It was billed as Disco Demolition Night. A rock disc jockey came up with the idea of blowing up disco records as part of his self-serving campaign against disco. And the White Sox went along by admitting anybody bringing a disco record for 98 cents.
You try something, you don't know how it's going to end up necessarily. You think it's a good idea, and it just got out of hand. He was more popular, had more pulling power than we felt was possible. I suppose I should have anticipated this, but nothing has ever given me any indication.
Sorry?
That's
exactly how WLUP's management described it. We did not mean to cause an insurrection.
Right.
Because we need some hearings.
So since we're watching part of the video, they're just talking. That was the manager, was it owner of the Sox? I didn't see who it was. But
I believe so.
Yeah, saying, we thought we'll just bring Steve Dahl in, and I'll have some quotes from him later. But they had no idea he was this popular. And so what ends up happening is he brought in a capacity crowd, which they were shocked by. And there were, not only did he bring 45,000 inside, but there were 15,000 plus outside. So who couldn't get in. So nobody was expecting Steve's stunt to draw this many people. And you have this combination of people who don't care about baseball whatsoever, who are drunk, who are probably stoned, who love rock and roll and hate disco. And Steve comes out and does this little thing with his, blowing up anyway. He does the theatrics that Howard will become known for when he does funerals later on. Yeah. But at this point, just keep in mind, Howard's biggest audience live appearance was when he went to a movie theater to introduce Magical Mystery Tour to an audience of 30.
Wasn't it the Sgt. Pepper's? Yeah,
Sgt. Pepper's to an audience of 30.
Yeah,
and
no. According to Colford, there were 2 people in the audience.
Right. I mean, yeah. So Steve gets an audience of 70,000. Howard has never drawn an audience of 70,000 for anything. His book signings brought 10.
Including his own movie, the end of the movie. They didn't have enough extras. They had to digitally, they had to include extras digitally to the AC/DC concert scene.
Yes,
and they were paying. Like I said, remember I met that at my friend's husband who lived in New York City and was DJing at the time. They were outsourcing other DJs to try to give tickets away to the premiere.
To stand in line, to make it look like it was happening.
Stand in line, to make it look happening.
I really believe that all of Howard's stage things, from the FCC rally to the funerals, he had this in the back of his mind. I'm going to draw a crowd of 70,000. It's going to turn into a riot. People are going to be so upset because Steve was only out there for 3 minutes or something, and he's gone. And then his fans are rabid and they want more, and they rush the field and they just start burning and they destroy. And Howard never inspired that kind of a reaction from any audience, despite the nudity on the stage, despite the rock and roll bands or Leslie West. He never inspired this kind of reaction.
Devotion. Yeah. No. Well, the only closest I'm thinking is the last day at K-Rock.
Maybe,
I don't know how many people were there. We could look it up. Actually, there should be a number in some articles. Also,
the free giveaway, the Sirius XM giveaway.
That wasn't that many.
Right.
That also too got infiltrated by the pests, which if you look at any of the pictures, they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
The Opie and Anthony fans.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the funerals, maybe one of the Philly funerals with the DeBella
I don't
funeral.
think he drew more than 15,000 at the most.
I'd say that was about right. Like hockey arena size.
What about the Central Park thing? That was
that's fictional.
Oh.
The Grant Park thing, isn't it?
That didn't really happen
for the movie. Yeah, nobody celebrated him being temporarily number one with adults. It's like number one with men aged 34 to 50 or something like that in afternoons.
Yeah, in 1985.
AC/DC didn't fly from Australia to congratulate him on his temporary stranglehold on the afternoons.
Ben, do you think we should tell Jamie Raskin about this event so that he can pull him in?
Who?
The congressman. So you can have more. Liz Cheney. Let's tell him about Steve Dahl and this terrible insurrection.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to play a little more of this.
We had rock concerts in which we didn't have this many people.
50,000 people got in before the White Sox called upon Chicago police to help close the gates. Didn't take long for the realization to set in that rock fans, under the influence of beer and drugs and armed with disco records they had been invited to destroy, don't mix with baseball. There was trouble almost from the start. Tiger outfielder Ron LaFleur saying,
without a doubt, it was the worst conditions I've ever played in.
Yes.
I was in Detroit the opening day, and they threw about 5 bottles at me, but they were throwing golf balls out there. On one play that I made in left center field, I caught the ball, and golf ball went right between my legs as the ball was going into my glove. And I looked down there, it was a golf ball. I thought it was a piece of paper or something. Then there was a few bottles thrown out there. And then records was zooming by everywhere.
It was probably a marshmallow, not a golf ball.
One stuck right back behind my foot.
Even the White Sox outfielders were wearing batting helmets. The White Sox lost the game 4-1. Then came...
So that was the buildup. That was them waiting for Steve. They were getting, testy. Yeah, antsy.
God.
And having to put up with it's a shitty baseball game.
This is hilarious. Where's the buffalo horns guy?
And like Steve says, look, they were 1,000 places out of number one, so they had no chance. I mean, it's this game meant nothing to Chicago.
It was a nothing game.
Yeah.
It was like one they were advertising years later. I can't remember, it was the Tampa Bay Devil Rays or someone, and then they said, wait till the 7th inning stretch, Vanilla Ice is going to come out and perform.
this event is mentioned in the HBO Bee Gees documentary. I watched it a few years ago, and because this really captured a strong point of view about disco. And, the Bee Gees were like the leading disco act, and there's this revisionist history that the disco sucks idea was homophobic and racist. And it has absolutely nothing to do with either of those things. I mean, listen to what Steve is saying. They don't like that it's ubiquitous. They don't like that it's soulless. They don't like the costuming that comes with it, how expensive it is, and so on. It's everywhere. It's in commercials. It's everything.
Right. You're also not going to a disco show. You're only going into clubs. And rock, at the part of the rock pageantry was to go attend a concert with outdoor, indoor, whatever. And it's just the sound. It was clearly about the music. It was just literally, it was mostly about the music and secondary about the culture of disco, which was really decadent. And, Studio 54, all this Plato's Retreat. It was like disco was, the disco was really also, there was a class issue with disco because it was meant for, as you guys said before, upper tier, or definitely like I said, more well-heeled people. A rock artist or rock band's fan would be definitely blue-collar people generally. Sam?
Yeah. It reminds me of the time, I remember specifically when boy bands started to become really popular, and the Britney and Christina whole thing during that time period. You would have during the VMAs like musical acts that were actually rock people just shaking their heads like, how is this? We went from Nirvana and like Pearl Jam to this. Like, this is we're right. This is what they hated it. Like, you could in the audience, you just saw the palpable dismissive, just shame on these people's faces during these shows in the beginning of it. Like, they absolutely hated it. The worst was to counter that. Then you started getting bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit, which real rockers hated that too.
Oh God!
Yeah. They thought that they were like the we're going to counter this. Like, they hated all of it.
Fred Durst singing with Christina Aguilera, bridging that. And anyway, but it's an apt comparison. But I would just say, I think rock and rollers were a lot more dangerous back then. They were a little. It was seedier and dirtier, and Howard would have been terrified to meet rock fans. I mean, there was a reason
him at this venue.
I mean, in Detroit, where he goes to blue collar Detroit and refuses to go to any event that he's not being forced to go to, because he's scared to death of blue collar people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, he ran away. Remember the fireworks?
With the Zeppelin concert. Yeah, he said they were throwing dynamite. I love that.
Right. Like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner.
Yeah. So Steve Dahl's literally in a burning down riot, and Howard hears a firecracker. They're throwing dynamite.
Sam, doesn't this just remind you of a video I just showed you? The Greece qualifying for the World Cup.
That was so great. Fillmore showed me Greece winning the World Cup.
Not winning the World Cup, qualifying for the World Cup.
Yeah, and then you basically like just started lighting everything on fire. It's so automatic and hilarious. I was like, holy shit.
I'll just show you right here really quickly, Ben. This is I just turned down the volume and just show you the video.
So hard. This is
One
so
sec.
funny.
Okay, so basically, they scored. So this was when flares were allowed in the stadium. There's 70,000 people in there.
Oh wow! So that's the amount of people that Steve Dahl drew.
Here we go.
Oh my God. Wow. Wow.
My cousin was at this game, actually. He'll never forget it.
Does it look more dangerous than it actually is? I mean, are these, because it looks like actual fires, but maybe it's just a lot of flares.
It's just flares. It's the same. It's the same, with the light going into the fire makes it, the smoke makes it look.
Oh my God. It looks like the summer of 2020 here.
Yeah.
I know. I think I made that comparison.
Yeah.
Mostly peaceful.
And then at one point you see the Russian goalkeeper. You see the Russian goalkeeper looking like an outtake from like Summer of Sam or something, and he's standing around because the game had to stop for about 10 minutes. Just one sec here. It's coming up right here. I think there he is.
Wow, that's a nice shot.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought
Lou Grant.
Yeah. So there's like a retrospective ESPN did on Disco Demolition. We're going to play a little of that clip, guys.
Delay the game. They're going Rusty, Disco, songs and things real loud, and we're gonna kill Disco today. Disco is
that looks like Howard.
And that, and I'm going. I was just in discotheque last night. How are you gonna achieve that, right?
The Tigers won Game 1 4-1. Then it was time for Steve Dahl, the disc jockey, to blow up some records. He took to the field in a Jeep at the command of his ragged army. His troops greeted him as a conquering hero as he seized the microphone.
All these clowns who paid 98 cents to get in the ballpark were going to have their moment of glory, and I thought it would happen very rapidly. 1, 2, 3, boom! That blew up real good! I mean, there was a flash and a stream of broken albums. Like, everybody just was stunned.
You know what this reminds me of is the poor planning that went into Woodstock 99. Like, you didn't think about what would happen next, and you just kept going, and you're surprised. I mean, it's just like, what did you think was going to happen?
Well, it's like I'm trying to think of it. You talk about 1979. I think the Warriors, the Walter Hill film, The Warriors, came out in 79, and they stopped showing it in theaters because they were afraid people were going to start riots because gangs in New York City at that time, specifically in New York, they thought, oh my God, it's going to incite some kind of violence. The same with New Jack City. About 10, 11 years later, New Jack City was pulled out of theaters because they thought it would spark gang warfare within the theaters. And and sometimes those headlines are worth more than the actual box office or, whatever the event actually is. So Steve Dahl, the mileage he got out of this was tremendous.
Plus, he simply talks about disco and how much he hates it because I think he really does. And he's very good at describing. I mean, when he started going into this a little bit and we were listening to some of it, it's great vernacular. Like, he's wonderful at describing this. When Howard tries to copy this in the form of like funerals it's so ad hoc garbage, ad hominem attacks that aren't really deep. They're not really fleshed out well. It's like so poor in comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have this news article that really just says basically what happened to him, his career. Since July 12, Dahl, 24, has been the hottest DJ in the United States. That's because he was the driving force behind the disco demolition that briefly transformed Comiskey Park from a normal baseball stadium into the site of a screaming mob scene that cost the White Sox a ball game and made rock and roll a dirty word with some people. If you scratch beneath the outrageous surface of the event, however, you soon realize that something truly amazing happened that night. A radio personality blew his whistle and about 70,000 people hummed the tune. Something that astonishing and scary hasn't occurred since the early days of rock and roll, when disc jockeys such as Dick Biondi in Chicago, Alan Moondog Freed in New York, George Hound Dog Lawrence in Buffalo, and Tom Clay in Detroit could snap their fingers and get thousands of kids to show up at a downtown location for some zany function. That was 20 to 25 years ago, when certain disc jockeys totally captured the imagination of their young fans. By contrast, throughout most of the 1960s and 70s, the rock-oriented riots, melees, and pitched battles were associated with rock stars like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Janis Joplin, and others. But on Thursday, July 12th, 1979, at Comiskey Park, the sole attraction was Steve Dahl and his ceremonial blow-up of disco records. About 55,000 young people filled the park to capacity plus, and another 15,000 milled around outside after being turned away. It's really something, Sox announcer Harry Carey said. When we had teen night the last few years, we were lucky if we attracted a few thousand extra fans. But this kid Dahl draws a full house and more outside. You got to respect that kind of drawing power, even if you don't like what happened on the field.
That's amazing.
So here's something from Steve responding to this. We had 1,500 kids inside the place. He's talking about earlier that year. We had 1,500 kids inside the place and another couple thousand outside, and I got worried about people getting hurt. In fact, 2 kids jumped on the stage during my act, and one of them had a knife. I guess that's when I realized the strength of this feeling against disco. So I stepped up my campaign. I started poking fun at the disco van. They drive it to parking lots, and then 2 people get on top of a truck and dance their little booties off. I told my listeners that they ought to follow disco van and rain marshmallows on the dancers, which they did. They gave away tickets to Village People so that their fans could go and mess with Village People fans. About 3 weeks ago, Dahl took over a suburban disco for an anti-disco rally that produced another near riot. More than 4,000 people showed up. Unfortunately, the club could only fit about 1,000, so 3,000 people were forced to stand outside. So you can just see that this was the audience. This was the reaction that Steve Dahl was having in Chicago, while Howard and Fred are doing recreations of bits they saw on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I was also going to say this reminds me a lot of the Pests. You know, Opie and Anthony would send the Pests to certain functions that they like, whether it be a play. And I remember they had them screaming stuff in the middle of it, and then they would play it for the show. So they would have their Pests infiltrate functions that they thought were lame or stupid or upper echelon, and they just wanted to mock the shit out of these people who took themselves so seriously. It wasn't necessarily a music, but it was the same sort of idea. And they really, captured the same amount of, I guess, hatred towards certain things. And really, they swayed their audience, and those Pests listen. I mean, they had soldiers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think of the Beatles. When John Lennon makes that "we're bigger than Jesus" comment, and disc jockeys were convincing people to destroy the records, have like Beatle album burnings, at the United States at the time, and they never really recovered. They did recover, obviously, but because he explained himself after the fact, but the damage was done in terms of what they thought of fucking touring and stuff, because that was the beginning of the end of them touring anywhere. But at any rate,
if you've got a guy who's hurting you in some way, it's standard operating procedure in radio to hire him away from the competition or find him a job out of town. Bob Bittins, then WHCN's overnight disc jockey and later the station's program director, said. WHCN's own morning man, Michael Picozzi, was doubling as the station's program director. As a result, WHCN chose not to hire Howard for its own morning show, but to steer him out of the market so he would no longer pose a threat. As the overnight jock at HCN, it was my job to start recording Howard's show after finishing my own shift, Bittin explained. The tapes and assorted newspaper clippings about Howard were given to Burkhart, Abrams & Associates, a leading radio consulting firm. As Howard tells the story, he desperately wanted to flee WCCC and made the jump to WWWFM in Detroit after applying for an advertised opening and impressing the general manager. Ample evidence, however, indicates that Howard's exit came about because he was a pawn in a tactical plan. The tape supplied to Burkhart Abrams was given to a member of the firm, Dwight Douglas, who was consulting WWWW at the time.
Even though Gould's doing a great job reading, it said, he missed a little bit in the sentence. It said, ample evidence, however, indicates that Howard's exit came about because he was a pawn in a tactical plan carried out by several people. So that's
in the audio. You didn't hear that?
No.
He cut out the several people part.
The several people part.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The several people, which to me is necessary to say because there's a whole strategy of chess going on behind the scenes in radio that has nothing to do with the will or want of these DJs. There is a much broader deep state, if you will, of radio industry heads and people functioning to fuck over other radio stations.
or to save their own.
There's an entire mechanism behind the moves. So it's not even really like Howard's in control of this, obviously. So that several people thing I think is important because it shows just how much it's not really his choice or anybody's choice. It's what these people choose to do with you and move you on the board.
Right. And then once you're moved around the board, without much notice, that format can change and you're out, right. Because the advertising dollar ultimately is what keeps everybody employed. Yep. And they're going to chase whatever format works.
And again, that just shows you even more so how lucky Howard and Robin were, because this is truly just a game of luck on how you placed during a certain time period and what they choose to do with you and move you and how they move you and where they move you. It's not you.
Well, like, for example, he wanted to be desperately win in Chicago, and he never could. He never broke Chicago.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were not going to, and loads, I'm sure, along the, the entire Midwest, I'm sure they hated his fucking guts. So if he had floundered somewhere, he would have ended up being like just kind of flittering out of the business eventually, just earning maybe a nice retirement, whatever. He probably would have been comfortable because seems like there were plenty of jobs for dipshits in radio at the time. He would never become. Yeah.
If it had worked out and the original plan of WWW had worked, which was simulcast Steve Dahl's radio show from Chicago to here, there's an interview I read today that they said they were in talks to do that. It didn't work out, so Howard got the job. And we all know that, well, I think we all know, Howard is taking the job that was once held by Steve Dahl.
Yep.
So he's literally had that position at that job, at that station. And the guy who hired Howard has no history at the station. The station has all kinds of format changes. And I think he even had a name change at some point. But there isn't, it's tumultuous. So it did have high ratings briefly, but that's because Steve Dahl gave them high ratings and then he left.
Yeah.
And the ratings started to fall rapidly once, just before I guess Howard got there, and then they continued to fall once he got there, and it was just too expensive. There were 5. Well, I know we'll get to this as we go, but there were like 5 rock and roll stations all competing for the same audience, and then it makes sense ultimately. Well, we can't continue with this format.
Yeah.
Right, and I will say this too: if you listen to this loyalty of Steve Dahl's listeners, of course he's going to be hated in the Midwest. I mean, this is like insane amount of loyalty, obviously. And so I can't believe that for so many years, and this is why this podcast is important in this sense, there's not anybody to really document what truly happened with Steve Dahl and Howard and the ripping off and just his own mythology regarding his rise to fame.
Oh, yeah.
So important.
I mean, this is a 23-year-old, 24-year-old we're talking about.
I know.
Too. Who's inspiring. So, but just to share some further at this point influences. So he does one of his characters is named Tyrone. It's this black guy. Howard stole him and made it Mama Luca Boo Boo Day.
Yes.
And one of the bits, Steve, or one of the segments that is referenced in one of the articles I read, this person said that they loved this when they heard it. Steve was talking about how cheap the station was, that they didn't have their own traffic copter. So as the guy read the traffic, or as he read the road conditions, Steve did the thumping against his chest to make it sound like the guy was in a helicopter. So which Howard just took and said, "Oh, I'm Mama Luca Boo Boo Day," meaning I'm Tyrone, in the traffic copter, meaning I'm playing off the fact that we don't have a traffic copter, just like Steve invented. Yep. But so when Steve ended up having to do a contract negotiation that fell apart at WLUP, one of the reasons why it fell apart was because his contract said, I don't want to answer to management. I don't want to have to attend any staff meetings. I don't want to be expected to promote any other DJs. So this is all Howard's playbook. Basically they just said, what did Steve ask for? That's what I wanted.
Yep. You mentioned the helicopter, the Tyrone, the helicopter reporter, because Kurt Chaplin in an interview, who worked with Jimmy Buff, and they did Free FM in New York, he talked about doing the exact same thing, the beating his chest, whatever he said. We needed to make, like, he worked with Imus. He said, and he worked with Howard early on when Howard was, where was he? It wasn't it had to be at WNBC. So he did know, he said, I knew Howard's playbook. Like, I knew exactly how to get ratings against him but I mean, if you studied Howard, then you would have known who Howard studied. It was a fascinating interview.
Especially if you studied radio.
That was the infamous interview at the Plaza. No, it wasn't an interview. It was press conference at the Plaza. He was promoting the E-interview show at the time, Howard. And I have video. It's on the Jimmy Buff when he confronts him in the studio, because he works for Dave Herman, I think. And then Howard brings him in the studio and hyperventilates, which we know is bullshit. But the anger before that, I believe, was real. A couple of people were talking about it recently, and I don't know anybody that wants to go through the video, but I'd love to, because I think Howard was upset and really was pissed off. But the whole except for the part where he has to go out and get his composure, that's all bullshit. But the idea that this guy, they went up against Howard in his own market and were actually doing well. He said they got eventually to the advertising dollars where they could sell space for $250 a minute, whatever, and the billing, like this Howard Stern type billing. But he said they just didn't have enough capital to continue if they had a little more money, a little more time, they would have eventually taken away some ratings points, because he said it was drastic. Anyway,
the saddest part too is this loyalty that Steve Dahl's fans had. They must have known that this was being ripped off, like how he was ripping him off. And I'm sure it came through. But it's so weird how it just is like muted from history. Like we just don't, like I said to Fillmore and Ben before this, I said, history is written by the winners of wars, the winners of the conquerors. It's not, it's a very fragmented, it's not real, a lot of it. It's written by the winners. So you're getting a skewed view.
Well, it's maybe it's too egotistical to think about, but maybe when Howard's dead or retired, there's going to be a revisiting of his career, and they're going to have a documentary, and they're going to need this show. They're going to need this particular saga to get their information, because a lot of it is fragmented. You got to I found stuff on Google Groups, which is 23, 24 years old now at this point, where people were discussing this, and radio forums where they're saying, oh, that guy that ripped off Steve Dahl. It only exists in print so far, more or less. However, I'm going to get in touch with Steve Dahl, and I'm going to ask him for permission to either do an interview, or B, supply us with any of the audio he might have from those days, so we can play them at another episode of this, just to have it for posterity, because I'd love it to be out there.
It should be.
Well, I listened to Steve before I ever even heard of Howard Stern, because I lived in Illinois, and listened to Steve and Gary. And so starting in the mid 80s or something, because I bounced around before starting to listen to Steve Dahl. And I was a huge fan. He was not on in the mornings at that point. He was on in the afternoons, late, like afternoon drive.
Yeah.
But he would do concerts with his band, and WLUP would do these concerts where some of the personalities would show up. I was too young to go to them. I never went to any of them. But anyway, the guy, up until I left anyway, had a huge fan base. And I've seen forums from Detroit. I saw a forum years ago that I found where they were talking about when they were young and Howard was on the radio, and that they couldn't believe, like, when they saw what he looked like what a joke he was, because he was like wearing like a Fair Isle sweater, and this is not a rocker. They could tell right away. That's one thing that I've said before about Howard, that he always talks about how like little kids don't like him, they're afraid of him when they see him. And my comment on that has been, they look at you and they look at their parents and they go, why are you accepting this as real? This guy isn't real. They're looking at, they go, that's not a real hair. That's not a real voice. That's not a real anything. Why are we all pretending it's real? And it's startling to them. Now, I would say that like teenagers are very good at zeroing in on fakers, and in their scene anyway. So when a guy like Howard comes in and says, we'll get to some of his quotes, but this is not a rock and roller. He's obviously not the guy he's pretending to be, these guys who are truly into this stuff, Steve Dahl fans and so on, would immediately sniff him out and go, this guy is fake.
Yeah.
And so I think that Howard, so I was going to say, I think that Howard, for not only that had the deal not worked out and Steve wasn't syndicated to that station, he ends up being syndicated to a competitor, but had it not been that the staffing was sort of new, like I think it was the general manager was new, or else the guy placing Howard, Dick, what's his name? Hungate.
Hungate, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, had been a little more regional, they would have known. You can't take a Steve Dahl ripoff artist and put him in Steve Dahl's spot, and expect Steve Dahl's fans to go, oh yeah, you do Dial-A-Date just like Steve Dahl's Dial-A-Date. Okay, we'll just take it. That's fine with us. So what it all relies on is the fact that when you flee town, for the most part in radio, no one's going to know, 2,000 miles away, the guy you're copying. They're never going to hear that guy. And the guy who is being copied, he's never going to hear your station 2,000 miles away. So that was how he was able to get away with it.
There's a later theft. There's a later bullshit claim, because one day we'll do like the show debunking all of the, I invented everything, Robin, and because he said it so many times. MTV Unplugged was the one that was my favorite one. I invented acoustic guitar playing. And so the jaywalking homeless game, the whole Jay ripped it off. His writers ripped it off from us. I looked back. I did the work. As far back as 90, the earliest homeless game, I believe, is late 97, like December perhaps. But there's a Vanity Fair article with Jay Leno where in 1996, where they discussed jaywalking. So you can't, like, the problem again. The evidence is there for you guys. You just got to dig it out.
Well, and Jay even defended himself in saying, you didn't invent man on the street. I mean, it wasn't Howard walking. Howard didn't get off his butt and leave the studio and go interview people.
No.
It's like, even news reporters. What do you think live coverage is of, like, what did you think of this? I mean, people, that has been going on since the beginning of TV.
That's what they're satirizing. They're taking non-events and saying, what are your thoughts on these non-events?
He stole Butt Bongo from Mark and Brian. Like, that was an Entertainment Weekly. I mean, and he made Butt Bongo Fiesta, not just stealing it, but packaging it and selling it.
Yeah, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again because it's really worth remembering. The reason why Howard got away with all of this is because his hometown, his region, is the media capital of the world, New York City. And so when New York turns on the radio, they're hearing their local radio DJ, Howard, not realizing that their local radio DJ is listening to tapes of the Chicago guy and of the LA guys and of the DC guys or whatever. And he's only listening to them because people told him, you need to listen to these, because he's not savvy enough. You know, he would just go like, and he didn't even know maybe that he was copying a morning zoo, but he was doing that as well. That started in DC. And in any case, the media being what they are, which is they're not going to be a guy writing about their local DJ, Howard Stern, is not going to go and do research and find tapes somehow to make sure you're not copying some other guy. It's not like I saw an article written. Steve Dahl, by the way, goes on that year to put out a gold album selling parody of disco called "Do You Think I'm Disco?" Yeah. Like 2 years before Howard puts out his parody album, which goes nowhere.
Just sucks.
And Kurt Loder, of all people, writes about, because Kurt Loder was a Rolling Stone writer at the time, not yet an MTV anchor, writes about Steve Dahl's his follow-up, which is about the Ayatollah. But anyway, Steve is like riding waves, and you can kind of point to his disco thing and go, he had an axe to grind. Disco ended his lucrative, the wave he was on, threw him off of it, and he's getting his revenge against it. And it's cool. That's an actual revenge story. Go ahead.
But not just this, also the song parodies that Dahl did. Howard, they could not get enough song parodies. Yeah, all those things. And so And there's nothing, guys. The reason why we're kind of harping on the whole stealing the theft thing is because let's face it. Ask Carlos Mencia how he feels about his career after it was out that he stole material. Amy Schumer, who should have been canceled from what she did on her show, but still somehow survived it. Don't ask me how. There are people that have lost their entire career on the basis of being called thieves. And if Robin Williams was powerful enough to, there's if you want a real comparison, a guy who stole material off fellow comics, paid them off at least. Yeah. Howard never did that. He paid them off when confronted about it, and then occasionally addressed it. But for the most part, they all agreed, yeah, he did it. He stole from Richard Pryor. He stole from, anybody. He stole from all the Comedy Store veterans at the time, and got away with it. Like he literally went on to become a movie star. So it is important in every sense of the word, every sense of the context.
And also, we're talking about a guy who accuses everyone of stealing from him. So
that's exactly it.
Then shouldn't you be well protected against these accusations of theft yourself? But it's also just interesting that had the domino fallen differently a couple different times, we would never have heard the name Howard Stern. And that is never. If they had syndicated to WWW instead of the rival, then they would never have brought Howard to DC. So he might never have left Hartford. He might have gone to Ohio. But he would have probably been doing Long Island Tradio at this point with Ali. But then the second time, if Mel Karmazin had gotten his wish, then Steve Dahl would have been his morning man and not Howard Stern. But they couldn't make it work, and so he brought in Howard Stern. So there were a couple of times where had things not fallen in Howard's favor the way they did, we would be talking about Steve and not Howard.
And if he had remained in Afternoon Drive in when they were in Washington, I was it Washington? I think they were Afternoon Drive.
He was Washington. He was afternoon at WNBC.
Oh, WNBC.
And he wanted to stay in He wanted to stay in afternoons.
Yeah.
And not compete against Imus because he was afraid.
Yes, and Robin claims she's the one that convinced him you got to go up against him, which that's maybe who knows. Yeah. So Sam, you were going to say,
no way Mel was going to pay him that kind of money and let him stay parked in afternoons.
No way.
I think Ben was right when he said he happened to land in the media capital of the United States, which is so you can look at this the same way like anything with, it's the coastal elites who kind of dictate whatever bad idea or anything. Like it's the flyover states get shut out, but eventually what happens is there's populist uprising of like, no, we are going to call this out. No, this is theft. No, we see you're a fraud. And eventually the pendulum sort of swings back. Now, there will always be this advantage of being the coastal elites who do this shit. But I think over time, like, especially since the dawn of the internet, that's not going to fly so much anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hungate decided that WWWW needed something totally different in the morning, something outlandish, yet topical. Something not previously heard in the Motor City. Reviewing the tape, he became convinced that the morning man from Hartford would be perfect.
Okay, there's that clip, and then we're going to go into Detroit job details.
Got a call. I saw in some magazine that in Detroit, a Burkhardt Abrams station looking for a morning guy. So I called Dwight. I go, why can't I work in Detroit? Number 8 market. Because you don't want to work there. It's a horrible station. There's 4 rock stations in town.
Another thing. I just thought of this, in order to keep this narrative going to erase Steve Dahl and the actual impact he had on radio and how loyal his followers were, and as Benjamin said, was about to blow up and we wouldn't even know Howard Stern, you have to have a cabal of people around you that are going to repeat the lie, that are going to constantly say the things that you declare about yourself, about your own mythology, and about how you came to be. And because he has now friends, just like how he held on to that Nozzle guy, he has carefully throughout his career placed people in high places that will repeat the lie, that will repeat the propaganda.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is how he has gotten away with this for so long, to the point that you can erase the memory of a guy that almost had an entire stadium burned down in disco records.
Right.
I mean, that's how absurdly insane the influence of propaganda is surrounding Howard's mythology.
Yeah. Well, the journalists he spoke to didn't treat him like he was lying to them. So just to wrap the Steve Dahl thing up really quick. I forget if it was to Time Magazine or Daily News or what, but Howard was talking about, I know we're jumping ahead, but why he had to leave Detroit. He said he had to leave Detroit because there was a DJ in Chicago who went on the air and told everybody I was stealing his act, when really he was stealing my act. So I had to leave.
Yep.
And no journalist pushed back on that and go, wait a minute, you left an entire city that wasn't even the same city as the other guy because he told people you were stealing his act, so you left?
Well, because there is if anybody can't figure out, we have a media that is completely the most uncurious media I've ever seen in my life. And so if you pick a journalist that is not, the least bit curious and doesn't do their homework, you can get away with just, print the talking points, transcribe my talking points, and that becomes the fact versus actually digging into the issue. And so I think Howard really got, that's why even if this might not make a huge impact in life, chipping at any sort of armor of this bullshit is so important.
Well, yeah. Ultimately, I want us to be the Encyclopedia Wigtanica type thing. So the ultimate. Anyway, I'm going to read the end of this one thing here. It was based on the clip that I wanted to get from Steve Dahl. He said this is from May 24th, 2012 edition of his podcast, and he talked about it, his rivalry with Stern. After calling into the Bijou for old time's sake, he said, "Someone sent me an email. I think it was an email or a tweet. I don't know, some form of communication about last week's descent into the archives. And I guess it featured me talking about some DJ in Detroit who was ripping me off or whatever, because he came to Detroit after I left. It turns out that it was Howard Stern. I don't really care. That's not a theme I was going for, even though he's a multi-billionaire and I just have like a little condo in New Buffalo and he has a $20 million house in the Hamptons. I'm not on America's Got Talent trying to act like I'm cool. Not that I wouldn't take that gig right now either, but I haven't really set myself up to be the kind of guy who doesn't take that gig. He kind of did. That should be beneath him. There's nothing beneath me. I'm in my basement."
But that's right. That should be that you should not be going on there and applauding at dancing dog for dancing dogs.
Right.
I know.
You should be the guy who is making fun of that guy.
That's right.
That if that had been Imus on that show, we would have been ridiculing him every single week. Can you believe this guy? He thinks he's cool. He's on there. He's dressing in his cowboy boots, and he's throwing away his whole legacy. That's what Howard would be saying. But Steve's right. But Steve says that as a guy who doesn't really listen to Howard and doesn't realize that he's not the renegade that you might have let yourself think he must be based on the profiles you've seen. He's actually completely the AGT guy. He watched every episode.
Yeah. I'm going to read a little bit that isn't in the audio. This is what Hungate said about Howard. He sounded on the radio as how Hungate had imagined he spoke off the air, whiny but natural. And then later on, basically they were going to get into the clip where they offer him the $28,000 a year to go to Detroit. So one sec.
On their number 4, nobody listens. I said, that's my kind of station. I sent a tape to the program director anyway, not regarding what Dwight had said. And lo and behold, that night, I get a call from Wally Clark, the general manager, and Dick Hungate, the program director, want to fly into Hartford and talk to me. They flew in. I didn't even tell my wife that I was going to go meet with these guys.
That's lovely. I'm not going to tell my wife about the thing that affects her
why should
completely.
she know?
Yes.
We've lived here 11 months. That's good enough. We can move now. Why should she find out?
It's almost just as bad as when he got the apartment for private parts, and that's how she found. I mean, he bought an apartment in the city with no care in the world to even let her know, and then this like I'm just I'm not gonna. You have a family, you have children.
Not only that, but they built him an apartment at Silver Cup for so that he didn't have to he could do looping or whatever.
And I think of the Allison angle a lot in this. So she's got the master's degree from NYU, from Columbia. Was it NYU or Columbia? One of the two. In psychology. She's a social worker. She's working at the Jewish something social worker thing in Connecticut.
Yep.
And then her husband says, I got another job. We're leaving. So she's got to go along with it. In the movie, it's, I can't believe your underwear was wet. You were cheating on me with a porn star in the bathtub. Right. And, of course, none of that actually happened.
Yeah.
So I have to go. So Mopey Howard has to go off to Detroit by himself while he learns to he realizes Allison's the most important thing in my life. What did I do? I blew. Right. That's all fake. Allison gave a 1 month notice to her job, which is why she had to stay behind. But so anyway, they go to Detroit and he pulls the exact same thing on her. A year goes by, 10 months goes by, and we got to go. I have another job in DC. So you always hear about, it's so hard for Mopey, for a DJ like Howard. What a hard life he had. What about Allison, who's constantly having to start over? She's got this degree her resume looks terrible because it's like, here's a few months of work and then you're gone. A few months of work and then you're gone. She's trying to make friends. She's trying to start a family. And it's just like, nope, we're leaving.
And then to top it off, he berates her about everything. Yeah. Like he treats her like, I don't know, a second-class citizen that's not you opened the garage door when I was sleeping. You didn't. You want me to get you Jingle Ball tickets, bitch? Like, this
well, that's to come.
But that's the level of like self-importance he has, not realizing you uprooted this woman twice.
Yeah,
from a professional career that has patients that
multiple
depend
times.
on her.
DC. She has the stability of a hockey enforcer, like she's good, or like an army brat that has to go from from Frankfurt to Okinawa or whatever the fuck.
And it's not like a job where you can you can work at any restaurant, you can work at any hair salon. No, these are patients with psychological problems.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Fucking psychiatrist or whatever, therapist. I don't know.
Right.
That's
social
important.
worker.
Pre-Zoom.
There's to do gay dance with the Goo Goo Dolls.
Absolutely.
That takes preference.
Yeah. With him, Wally did that thing where you write down his salary and he slipped it to me on a piece of paper, slid it toward me. I open it up, $28,000. I'm like, holy shit, 28 grand. I'm going to be in Detroit. They're telling me about a whole new facility they're building in the Renaissance Center, which is beautiful. They describe Detroit to me. I don't even know where Detroit is. I didn't even know that, like, Canada is an
Of course he didn't know where Detroit was.
Right.
Of course.
Right. And he definitely didn't know that he was stepping into Steve Dahl's old place because he would have been too afraid to have done that.
And they're going to
I can't take the guy's act who I've stolen and go there. But oh shit! I was going to say,
if you was carjacked and mugged,
if you listen to this guy, to the penny what his salary was in radio until he surpasses 28 grand a year. Then he refuses to talk money. Isn't that crazy? Like I was making $96 a week. Oh, I was making this much. I was making $28,000 a year, and then. Oh, it's not appropriate to talk about salary anymore.
Yeah, suddenly.
You want to just leave it at 28 grand a year? All right.
I don't want because I don't want my kids to know as I leave our 13-room mansion that when they ask me for a 5, I can afford it.
Or specifically, I don't want blue collar people to rip me off.
Yeah.
Right, and I want to also complain about long distance phone calls. When I'm a millionaire, my kids are draining every penny out of the system. Are you?
Or bunny toys.
Turn out the lights.
About last week.
And then it's also funny too how he always says, my parents paid for college or my parents got me a car. Do you think that resonates with blue collar people whatsoever? Right. But he'll say that dutifully, but he won't say how much he makes past this certain point. We know
28 grand a year.
We know you're privileged when you say your parents paid for college and a car and you're dumb and they helped you get a job. I mean, that's privilege. We get it. We're not fooled.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of it. I came home and I said to my now ex-wife, I said, I got a job offer in Detroit, 28 grand. She goes, you didn't even tell me you were meeting. It didn't occur to me that it would even come to fruition. I don't know. I was just, my head was up my ass. Called my phone.
Your head was up your own ass because you're the only one that matters in your world.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And, she's a peripheral beard. So this whole life, like this fallacy life he's living, that's another...
Yeah,
he's not thinking about it. It's all an act.
The only blessing they had was they had no kids at this time, because as screwed up as the kids would have been, like Emily for sure ended up a little kooky. Imagine them moving from school to school to school constantly because you're moving cities and you don't like that. That screws up kids like no one's business.
Yeah, he didn't have kids yet, but just imagine too that put yourself in this position. You're in this position for a second. Your husband or wife comes home and says, by the way, I had a job interview and I accepted it. You go, why wouldn't you tell me you had a job interview? We're married. Why couldn't you tell me you had a job interview?
And not only that, you're moving to a different state. That's like saying you signed up for the draft. Like you're going to the Marines.
Right.
Sorry, I'm going to be in Afghanistan.
Oh, and by the way, where's Detroit?
It's right next to Omaha.
Allison, do you know where it is?
I do find it interesting that the kids, though, like you said, Emily, thank God she wasn't around then and she's a little kooky. But I don't know if she's exactly kooky, as if she lives her life as a total rejection of everything that she had to deal with. So she is a really Orthodox Jew, rabbi. And it's kind of fascinating to watch because it's a complete rejection of all of the not traditional wild behavior of her father and the antics that she probably had to put up with and witness.
No, well, what I mean by kooky, I'm not trying to denigrate her adherence to, religion and become a really strict, now she's a rabbi, actually, as far as I know. So I'm not talking about that. It's more along the lines of she didn't know what she was going to do before she became a rabbi. So she released, she did the Kabbalah play, and she, was a trust fund kid living downtown. And then all of a sudden, she's releasing music on guitar. And then all of a sudden, I've got an album out, and I'm taking up photography. And that photography exhibit that went the way of the dinosaur as soon as that article came out from the Post. And so and then that article explains fully, like if she said I didn't have any direction. If you didn't have any direction, is because you had a nanny instead of a mother, and you had no father. You had nothing instead of a father. So, I mean, I'm sure Allison was there for them. She wasn't, she wasn't Howard. But if you're missing that parent in your life, all of a sudden, you have a dad, but you don't. That has to do a number on any kid. Fuck. I mean, you're almost better off with divorced parents spending time with either of them in different coastlines, or on the weekend with this one and during the week with that one. At least you see them. They never even got a chance to see this fucking.
Oh yeah, towards the end, Allison forced Howard, "You're going to join the family for dinner on Sundays."
Yep.
Because we don't see you, and she said, and on one of the recordings I heard. He sits there in silence and wolfs his food down and then leaves as soon as he's done eating. So he's being the petulant child going, fine, Mom, I'll sit here. I don't have to like it. I don't have to talk. So that's his own kid. I mean, that's when forced to be a dad, that's how he would act.
And then
do you know who was – sorry, Sam, go ahead.
You also see after that only eventually it becomes Ashley that comes around and he does things for and visits with and sees on a regular basis. But initially it was the three of them, and that dropped off really quick, that the older kids refused to participate in whatever form of quasi-parenting he was producing. Like if they had the choice, they didn't want to be around him.
Yeah. Do you know who's actually got an eerie parallel in terms of parenting with Howard? It was a friend of the show, Frank Zappa. he would be living in the studio. Once he built a studio in the house, he would be recording, writing, performing, editing. When he went to dinner, he would eat as fast as he could, not talk, and get the fuck out of there. So the only time any of them could spend any time with him is when they went in the studio to record with him or whatever. So in a lot of ways, he was no better as a parent.
That Howard wasn't working. He was downstairs watching MTV Grind and wherever else was on at the time.
With Ralph,
just to
9
avoid
Inch Nails.
with his basement door that would lock from a desk button, which is true. He really did have that in his office.
Right. It took Ashley going through the doggy door to catch him.
Right, a security camera to let people know if he would be aware if someone was coming down the stairs.
Right.
So it's so they're different in that way. I mean, they're similarly assholes perhaps, but different in what they were doing.
Yep.
Father said, "Do you think I could ask him for 30 grand? I mean, might as well leave it out." He goes, "Go ahead." And, called, asked Wally for 30. Says, "Done deal. Let's go."
Okay, so there's that one, and then we're going into Wiggy might have been pissing his pants having to follow Steve Dahl in Detroit. So this is part of the book itself.
Hungate and the general manager, Wally Clark, flew to Hartford and at dinner offered Howard the morning show at a salary of $28,000 a year, more than double what he was making at WCCC. If Howard had any doubts about taking the job, he hid them from his suitors. But he gave his colleague, Litch, the impression that he still had plenty of thinking to do. Perhaps he feared following in the path of Steve Dahl, who had left Detroit radio for Chicago 2 years earlier and had become an audible influence. Howard was being wooed to the job at WWWW that Dahl had once held.
Okay, and then the next clip is called Busted.
On the air, Dahl tweaked Chicago institutions and berated callers. Animal House pranks included dropping things out a station window to see what kind of reaction he would get from passers-by below. Dahl was among the popular radio personalities who presented an audio form of TV's The Dating Game, in which a bachelor or bachelorette questions interested callers, then selects one of them for a date.
Sorry for the audio quality, guys. It's from a cassette. I'm sorry.
Howard had his own dial-a-date routine on WCCC and was all too familiar with Dahl's shtick because he used to listen to tapes of Dahl's show in Hartford.
There you go.
On the air.
Sorry. So there's that, and then there's one last one, and it's just a point about the Steve Dahl comparison.
Respect for Dahl's style, never disclosed by Howard or reported by the media, would give way to unforeseen competition in Detroit between the two morning men before long. And an even nastier rivalry would flare more than a decade later when Howard's show was being syndicated in Chicago.
So the in between there is some comments from Lick. Lick received the recordings from a friend in Chicago. Howard and I used to listen to the tapes while sitting in my car after playing racquetball, Lick stated. He didn't say much about them, but looking back, you can tell Dahl was the catalyst for what Howard later ended up doing. I know Howard would never admit that, but what he took what Steve Dahl was doing and took it to the next dimension. I don't think he took anything to the next dimension. It's more like dementia or just outright deviancy when you think about it later on. But let's maybe stop that right there, guys. That wraps this episode up, guys. We hope you've enjoyed it thus far. We hope you enjoy the rest of the ride as well. Many thanks to Sam and Ben for joining me on this one. It's always a lot of fun. And take care, guys. We will see you on the next one. Have a great week.
Gay boy, rock star, friends with Allison, Oxycodone, off context, my child, fruit pill, social worker, CNN. Off context. Press release, Beverly Hills, lunch snack, diet.
I like you a lot.
Black guy at Wendy's.
Going, come on, you're great. This is great.
Linda Perry, Road Songs, Patty and Samantha, Women Give, Jessica Cincy, I'm Happy.
ADT, okay. ADT. There he is.
Divine Bass Player.